Now you're on.
Okay. Councillor Swanson, Councillor Hardwick, Councillor Weave, Councillor Boyle, not in the chamber, Councillor Dominato, not in the chamber, Councillor Bly, Councillor Kirby-Young, not in the chamber. You have quorum.
Councillor Boyle's here.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Great. I would like to acknowledge we're on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. We thank them for having cared for this land and look forward to working with them in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. And also want to take a second to recognize our amazing staff here at the City of Vancouver. They do so much work and put in late hours and try to make this city work, and are doing a great job. So thanks very much. Have a few announcements. The speakers will have 5 minutes today to make their comments and should limit their comments to the merits of the report being considered. Speakers should also state whether they are in support or opposed to the recommendations. Speakers may only speak once. Any additional comments, though, can be sent in writing to publichearing@vancouver.ca. That's publichearing@vancouver.ca. Those speaking on behalf of 3 or more persons or 3 or more organizations will have up to 8 minutes to speak. The persons or representative of the organizations must also be present and must not be speakers themselves. Finally, if council does not conclude hearing from all speakers this evening, we will recess and reconvene the meeting at 6 p.m. on Thursday, June 20th, here in council chamber. So, do we reread the application after reconvening? Okay. Okay, great, thanks. On Tuesday, we postponed staff and applicant presentations in order to start hearing from our speakers. Tonight, we will start with the staff and applicant presentations, followed by responses to questions sent to staff. We'll then move on to hearing from remaining speakers. Following speakers, staff and the applicant will have an opportunity for closing remarks, and council will be able to ask any more questions before we make a decision on the application. Right, so everybody okay with this? Good, thank you. So clerk will now go on to read the updated summary of correspondence received. Thank you.
Since June 11th at 5 p.m. until 3 p.m. today, Council has received the following additional correspondence: 66 emails in support, 12 emails opposed, and 2 emails regarding other matters related to the application. Since referral to public hearing, Council received a total of 284 emails in support, 249 emails opposed, and 7 emails regarding other matters related to the application.
Great, thank you very much. So now I'll go on to have staff presentation. We have Yan Zheng from Planning here to present.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Yan Zheng, Senior Rezoning Planner. I will make a presentation of this rezoning application and also answer questions raised by Council from Tuesday night. Thank you. The subject site is one single lot located on the west side of Granville Street, south of Connaught Drive, and north of West 32nd Avenue. On the site today sits a single-family house with an attached garage at rear, access from the lane, currently occupied by the owner. Sites in the immediate vicinity are large lots developed with large single-family homes, all zoned RS5. Granville Street is a major arterial served by a number of bus routes. Directly to the south of the site is a lot occupied by the Vancouver Hospice Society, in operation at this location since 2011. This application is proposing to rezone the site under the Affordable Housing Choices Interim Rezoning Policy, referred to as the AHC policy. This pilot program allows expanded opportunities to consider rezoning applications for new housing near services and frequent transit. Shown on the map in red and blue colors are the arterial road network in the city with good services, good bus services, and where this rezoning policy applies. The red sections indicate where there are local shopping nodes. The difference between the dark blue and the light blue sections are the height and density criteria. The general principle is that whereas for sites closer to local shopping, higher formal development can be considered. But for sites along light blue lines, lower formal development is anticipated in order to demonstrate the scale transition concept to lower density surrounding neighborhood. Along this section of Granville Street, where this site is located, shown on the map with a yellow star, maybe a red star, development up to a height of 4 stories may be considered. This application is proposing 2.5 and 3.5 stories. To quickly summarize the application, it proposed 2 stacked townhouse buildings, 1 3.5-story building facing Granville Street, and 1 2.5-story building facing the lane. The proposed floor space ratio is 1.33. 21 secured market rental units are proposed, including 8 one-bedroom units and 13 three-bedroom units over 1 level of underground parking. This is a family-oriented development with 62% of family units. This application has received significant public feedback over the course of the review process. Before submitting a formal rezoning application, a pre-app open house was hosted by the applicant, held in December 2017, and was attended by 47 people, and a total of 36 comment forms were submitted to the applicant. After the application was received, a city-hosted open house was held April 2018 and was attended by 355 members of the public. Throughout the course of the review process, staff also met with the Vancouver Hospice Society multiple times to hear their concerns. Comments received included comment forms, online feedbacks, form letters, and a petition. Staff would like to note that there is a correction to the number of signatures noted on page 10 of the report. The report listed 220 signatures for the petition received by staff. However, due to a staff error, the correct number is 598 signatures. The substantive concerns outlined in the petition have been thoroughly accounted for in staff assessment. It is also important to note that there is some duplication of the responses because staff have received comments through a number of mediums. As such, and as always, staff focus on qualitative theming of the comments. Overall, people who supported the project stated they support the provision of rental housing in the city, support for more good-sized family rental housing options, as there is particular need for it in the city and for this area. There was also support for the building design, citing it appropriately fits into the arterial street, as well as transition in scale with the existing single-family houses in the area. Key concerns included contextual fit, that the building do not fit into an established single-family neighborhood.
Okay.
Impact to the hospice, too many people, too much noise to disrupt the peace and quiet of the operation of the facility, and that construction noise will affect the viability of the facility. A loss of street parking and increased lane traffic is noted as a concern by adjacent neighbors. And lastly, comments that these rental units may not be affordable. I will go into discussion of the concerns one by one. The proposed building massing of the townhouse forms is consistent with the intent of the AHC policy. RS5, the base zoning, allows a building height of up to 10.7 meter, which is 35 feet. The proposed building height for the 3.5-story building, the townhouse facing Granville Street, is 12.6 meter, marginally higher than what's permitted under the base zoning. The lane-side townhouses are stepped down to 2.5-story to better transition to the lower-scale single-family housing across the lane to the west. This townhouse's height would be 10.4 meter, slightly lower than the maximum permitted height under the zoning. Further, in response to the RS5 zone's emphasis on fit with the surrounding context and open landscape, a 12.0 meter, which is 38 feet, wide courtyard separating the 2 rows of townhouses is proposed in the center of the site. And lastly, considering this is Granville Street, a major arterial road in the city, the proposed townhouse form fits appropriately as the city continues to densify. As shown on this aerial photo, directly to the south of the site is a lot occupied by the Vancouver Hospice Society, an 8-bed residential hospice. The facility is classified as a community care facility and has a secured funding commitment from the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority. Community care facility in this case is a conditional use that may be permitted in single-family residential areas under the discretion of the Director of Planning, provided it can be integrated into the surrounding area and does not cause undue impact. As mentioned earlier, staff met with representatives of the Vancouver Hospice Society throughout the application review process, and the feedback provided from the hospice, along with other public feedback, have assisted staff with assessment of this application. Staff appreciate the sensitive situation of the operational needs of the hospice and have recommended changes to the form of development to mitigate potential impacts. These conditions are outlined in Appendix B of the report. The applicant has responded with design changes to reflect staff's overall direction. The following slides demonstrate some of these responses to meet key concerns of the society. Design development strategies to address impacts to the hospice began with the creation of a quiet zone on the subject site to buffer noise to the hospice. Following the pre-app open house, the applicant responded to community feedback about traffic congestion in the lane by relocating the parking ramp to the north end of the site. This will lessen disruption to the hospice operation by minimizing the amount of foot traffic at the site's southwest corner. The children's outdoor play space is relocated to the north end of the courtyard, away from the hospice. Substantial landscaping will be planted in a 10 to 15-foot wide strip zone along the southern property line. These design strategies combined will help create this quiet zone along the south end of the subject property closest to the hospice. And lastly, to address construction impact and to respect the need for peace and quiet of the hospice during construction, staff also included a condition to provide construction noise mitigation measures. The applicant in this case has worked with staff to come up with ideas, such as, by way of a construction mitigation plan, ways to reasonably minimize construction activities that produce heavy noise, dust, or debris, utilizing methods and techniques to mitigate noise, white noise machines to control noise source throughout the construction period, and that if the application were to proceed, they also wish to work closely with the society to develop construction time constraints during the most sensitive operational hours of the society. Secondly, formal development conditions have also focused on the end units in the development to preserve privacies for the hospice along their side yard. We understood hospice residents frequently use the bay window by the outdoor patio along the shared property line, which gives them an expansive view of the open sky. A wide central courtyard separating the two townhouse rows means that the proposed buildings are focused on the east and west side of the property, away from the window and patio of the hospice building, allowing residents of the hospice to maintain the view they wish to be preserved. This perspective shows what the view would be like for the residents sitting by the bay window facing the side yard and the patio. A design condition is also included to reduce the top floor massing for the townhouse building facing Granville Street on the southernmost end unit, which will help with privacy overlook into the hospice side yard. And all the south-facing balconies are reoriented, so their outlooks do not directly face the hospice. And finally, a landscape condition to add privacy screening to balconies and private outdoor spaces is also included in Appendix B. There were also concerns over loss of street parking resulting from this development. In response to these concerns, the applicant has since expanded the underground parking to one full level with a total of 32 parking spaces. This parking ratio is above the minimum required of 19 space for rental development under the city's parking bylaw. As part of the rezoning, the applicant will also be required to repave the lane adjacent to the site and provide lane improvements such as a concrete lane crossing and new curb returns and curb ramps on both sides of the lane entry at Connaught Drive. The last concern I'm going to talk about is about the affordability of the rental units. The intent of the HC policy is to provide a range of ground-oriented and mid-rise affordable housing options that are not currently permitted under zoning. The alternative tenures of this housing, be it rental housing, senior life lease, community land trust, fit into the overall housing continuum and provide more affordable housing options than home ownership in this city. Currently, 11 developments have been approved under this policy, and there are 4 in-stream applications, including the site under discussion tonight. As you can see on this map, there has been an even distribution of AHC policy projects across the city, delivering a wide variety of housing options that didn't already exist in the market. And we're talking about approximately 860 housing units in total, mostly rental. In particular, the ground-oriented form proposed by this application is especially suitable for family housing. The Housing Vancouver strategy aims to drive a shift towards the right supply of housing for people who live and work in Vancouver. This includes a greater supply of ground-oriented housing stock. The strategy sets a 10-year target for approximately 5,000 townhouse units throughout the city, and so far we have under-delivered on this target. Approval of these rental townhouse units would provide much-needed family rental options that are currently not available in a very pricey neighborhood. And I would also I will address questions raised by council from Tuesday evening before I wrap up. So at the end of public hearing on Tuesday, council said that they would send questions to staff through emails. And by 6 p.m. today, we have received 7 questions. The first question is related to funding for the hospice. Staff would like to introduce Kristen Farquharson, Interim Director, City Center, Older Adult and End-of-Life Care of Vancouver Coastal Health. She's here to address questions related to hospice funding and other related issues, and she can come up after I wrap up. There was also a question about the value of the hospice property, whether the value of the hospice land is the same or close in value to other properties in the area. And yes, the hospice property is the same value as other RS5 zoned properties in the area. The third question is about location of other hospices in the city of Vancouver. Are they located near playgrounds? Are they located in areas similar to this hospice with more or less the same amount of noise? And are there parking issues? So hospices are located in a variety of neighborhoods in the city of Vancouver, both high and low density with a variety of adjacencies. There is Cottage Hospice located in the Burrard View Park in a residential neighborhood with park uses and a playground adjacent. The facility has designated parking and staff are not aware of any street parking issues in the area. There is Maze Place, located at 333 Powell Street in Japantown in the downtown east side. The hospice is in a 4-story building and is surrounded by mid-rise buildings. In this location, Powell Street is a one-way street carrying westbound traffic into the city center. No parking issue is known to staff at this location. There is also St. John's Hospice, which is located on the UBC campus, adjacent to a condominium tower with designated surface parking. The next question was, how did the hospice come to locate in the neighborhood, and how long has the hospice resided in this area? The hospice applied for a development permit and purpose-built the facility in 2011 as a community care facility. Even though the hospice is a permitted use under the RS5 zoning, additional building depth and reduced front yard were granted, making that application conditional. The next question, was there any consultation with the neighborhood as part of that development permit application? If so, what was the result? So yes, there was a notification as part of the development permit process. Staff received comments from the neighbor residents that they were concerned about the proposed use, i.e. it's a hospice, not a house, and traffic around the area, and parking issues and lane congestion used by the hospice. The next question is whether there could be other sources of noise in the neighborhood, be it construction of a single-family house or road work in the area. Could that impact the hospice? So this is certainly a possibility. Granville Street is a main arterial with excellent access to transit, and throughout current rental housing policies was identified as an area appropriate for growth. As such, it is anticipated to see more changes in the future. It is also foreseeable that there will be other homes built nearby and possibly directly adjacent to the hospice. For example, as been noted by a speaker, should the next door site be redeveloped, it will allow a single-family home of approximately 12,000 square feet. In terms of construction time, the construction time for a small, low-density project like this one before council today is comparable to that of a large single-family home in the area, typically about 18 months. So, and then the last question was whether there is any possibility or any way the applicant may allow access to the playground located on the site to families visiting the hospice. I think I'll leave that, the answer to that question to the applicant. Anyway, thank you so much. Just in conclusion, I wanted to wrap up that staff support this rezoning application as is consistent with the HC policy and will result in 21 new secured market rental units along the major arterial developed in a form that's appropriate to its location and its context. Design development conditions to reduce impact to the hospice operation are incorporated in conditions of approval, and staff commend the applicant team for their responsiveness in coming up with design changes to reshape the project in order to address concerns of the hospice. The General Manager of Planning, Urban Design, and Sustainability recommend approval of this application, subject to conditions outlined in Appendix B of the report. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And before we move on to questions from council, I'm just going to ask if the applicant is here. Great. And would you like to present anything or just answer questions?
The applicant team is here today, sir. We would like to present.
Sure.
Should we do it now before the other?
I think that's probably a good idea, and then we can answer. We can ask questions both to council and the applicant at the same time. No. Sorry. So Vancouver Coastal Health first, and then on to the applicant team. Thanks very much.
Hello, I'm Kristen Farquharson with Vancouver Coastal Health.
Thanks for coming.
So I know that you've had some questions that have come up. I'm happy to just field questions as they come. I can give a bit of an overview of our relationship with the hospice. What would people prefer?
Can you just move a little closer to the mic as well? So any questions for Vancouver Coastal Health? I know. Right. Let's see. Right. So I have a queue here for questions. So I'm just going to go down the list, and if you don't have questions for the speaker, you'll have to go back on. So Councillor Swanson.
I have one question, which is about the model.
Well, let's leave that for staff. This is just for Vancouver Coastal Health.
Okay.
So she'll have to put yourself back on. Councillor Kirby-Young, do you have a question for VCH?
Sure, thank you. I'll take the opportunity for a quick question. From a health perspective, I wonder if you can comment on the potential impact of construction noise on a project such as this, if it's something that should be considered significant or not significant, or how that might impact people that are undergoing this type of care.
Mm-hmm. It's a difficult question to answer in terms of measuring the health impact. I think that the nature of the care provided at the hospice is such that it's sensitive. It's a licensed care facility, so it absolutely needs infrastructure that isn't interrupted at any point in time. Clear access to the building at all times, so no disruption to flow to and from the building from deliveries, visitors, paramedics, and various services that might be coming and going. In terms of air quality, noise, those types of disruption, it's certainly a consideration, and we would hope that every effort would be made to mitigate any risks associated with that.
Okay, and on the flip side, because we've gotten lots of feedback on this file on of varying degrees, I also hear as it relates to noise that sometimes it can be a positive for people that are at this stage. For example, if there's family dwellings next door, if you're hearing kids playing, that hearing those signs of community or life could be a positive. Can you speak to that from a mental health or health point of view?
I mean, I think that would be an individual journey for a person, so it's hard to speak collectively about each person's journey at the end of life and what's meaningful to them. We do have hospices. The cottage hospice referred to earlier is in a park-like setting with a playground, so, there's an example of a place where people are embedded in a community setting, and other examples like Maze is urban. So I think that each one provides a different environment, and when people are selecting a hospice, they're doing so, they have the opportunity to make two choices and to understand what those options are in the city. And so that would inform where they're selecting to go as well.
Okay, and final quick question. I understand that the cost for services is, and if you can't speak to this, this is more the operators, let me know, is $500 per day, and it's been cited that's a significantly more affordable option in terms of public cost than palliative care or being in other facilities. Is that the case, and are those government funded costs through the medical system?
So the costs for both palliative care in a hospital acute care setting and the hospice are healthcare expenses. It's difficult to compare because they're different services. So a palliative care unit in a hospital is an acute care setting where someone at end of life would go for symptom management, but it is different than a hospice where someone would go for end-of-life care through the final weeks and months of their life.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Genova.
Thank you very much. I'm not very familiar with Vancouver Coastal Health's relationship with licensing of hospice facilities. That being said, I actually live in Burrardview and quite close to St. James Hospice. So I understand it's in a park-like setting. I also understand it's by the port, though. So there's a lot of noise coming from there as well. Does Vancouver Coastal Health have any requirements when it comes to this? I mean, obviously there's looking at ways to mitigate noise, but in looking at locations that you license, is that a requirement you have or something that you work on or suggest to hospice providers or talk to them about? I also heard about hospices integrated within other buildings, multifamily residential. So just wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on that, like what your requirements are for licensing hospices and if a situation like this has ever come up before.
So the licensing regulation is provincial, and then each of the health authorities has branches that carry out the implementation of that regulation in their local settings. And so that covers environments like hospices, childcare facilities, residential care facilities. There's a whole continuum of licensed facilities. And, I couldn't speak directly to what the regulation might say around environmental considerations before approving a license for operation. I could certainly look into that, but it isn't something that we've come into contact in terms of that end of the process.
Okay. I'm familiar with some of your licensing because I worked in nonprofit housing, We're in a different hat, but bringing that to the table, I'm not familiar with the hospice though. So I know that there are certain requirements when we talk about accessibility, housing, placement, trying to integrate people into the community, but I understand that this is a very sensitive use. Has Vancouver Coastal Health ever suggested sort of that there's a specific place that a hospice should or shouldn't be, or looked at sort of the potential for construction around that? And sorry to put you on the spot, but I have you here, so I was going to ask you these questions.
I mean, fair question. I don't know that I could comment about that. I think when we're looking at resource distribution more generally in the city, we're looking at, having access in a variety of neighborhoods. If we're thinking about our hospices, we've got one on the east side, one on the downtown east side, out at UBC, and this more centrally along the Granville corridor. So that gives us a good spread across the city for people who are wanting to visit, and those are some of the considerations. And those are factors that go into place too when someone's selecting a hospice that they'd want to go to at end of life. How close is it into a neighborhood that their regular visitors would be?
Okay, thank you. And then to the permitting question, I suppose, if this project was to move forward in looking at, like, for instance, I think about affordable rental or the short program that the City of Vancouver has implemented, do you think that a shorter period of construction time, if possible, and I'll ask our staff about if that is possible, but would that be helpful for I suppose, not only neighbors, surrounding neighbors, but for the hospice, if this was to move forward?
I mean, I think anything that mitigates the impact on the hospital would make a difference, and certainly timelines of disruption are a consideration, so that I would expect would be helpful regardless of the type of construction.
Okay, and my final question, because I understand there are others on the queue and we have many speakers tonight, is would Vancouver Coastal Health's licensing be put in jeopardy in any way by the proposed project right now, or would you?
So we have an existing contract that goes for many, many years with the Vancouver Hospice Society to provide 8 beds of hospice care, and that would go well beyond the time frame that the council's considering right now, and we would have to look at those beds. We need them. They're utilized. Of the 36 to 38 beds that we have in the city, they're utilized. We rarely have vacancies.
I'm just going to clarify the question. There's nothing that would put the hospice in jeopardy of licensing because of this
Because
project.
of a project next door.
Because of this specific, because we're here to discuss and we're in a quasi-judicial hearing, this project, there's nothing that would put the hospice in jeopardy currently because of this proposed
From a
project.
licensing perspective, there's nothing on my radar, right?
Great. Thanks
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
5 minutes. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. And I have a question that sort of dovetails actually with that one, which is that I'm just curious. I know a significant portion of the funding for the hospice comes from Vancouver Coastal Health. Is that, and I appreciate you saying there's a long-term relationship, is that funding in jeopardy? Are you?
So the funding isn't in jeopardy. We have a contract with them that goes beyond 2030.
Okay.
And so, and there are terms within that contract for a termination, which is a year of notice. So it isn't something that would be changed quickly if one of the parties wanted to make a change, but that isn't our intention at this time.
Okay. And I have some questions just about hospice and what good deaths look like, but I think on the speakers list we have other folks who might be good to ask those too. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Swanson, did you want to ask questions or do you want to wait for? Okay, great. Thanks very much. That's it for questions for you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we're going to go on to the applicant now, if you want to present. Thanks very much for coming.
Good evening, Mayor Stewart, members of the council. My name is Granville. It's my pleasure to represent our family here this evening on our proposed rezoning of our family home at 4575 Granville. We have lived in the site for about 7 years and pride ourselves on being good neighbors. We had originally planned to build a large 12,250 square feet home on this lot as permitted under the current zoning, which we have plans and drawings for. However, about 2 years ago, we became aware of the interim rezoning policy and made a decision to build secured family rental. My family and I have been, and our planning team have worked hard and spent considerable resources over the last 2 years to ensure we are following the city's policy to a T. We have also spent effort and resources to be as responsive to our neighbors' concerns as possible. As a member of our team will note, if we are permitted to proceed this evening onto the development permit stage, we will remain willing and committed to work with our neighbors, in particular the hospice, to minimize the impact during construction, including halting construction, if there is a solo moment that needs to be respected on the lane. Thank you for your time in hearing our proposal. I'd like to thank all the speakers in advance for their participation in the process.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Brent Todderin. My company is Todderin Urban Works. I am a relatively new addition to the applicant's advising team. About a week and a bit ago, at the beginning of last week, I was asked to review, I was hired, and to be clear, I'm a paid member of the consulting team at this point, but my consulting practice is such that I do things a little differently. I was asked to do an independent review of all of the information available with the application and provide my perspective, my advice, comments, and potentially, depending on my actual perspective on the results, possibly share my comments with you, which is why I'm here as part of the applicant team's presentation. I want to give you the results of my own independent assessment of the situation. It was important to me to realize that the applicant was an owner-occupier whose alternative was a large, massive, single detached house, which, as council knows from my long history with the city, is of concern to me in such an important corridor for strategic densification. I do believe that Granville Street is an obvious place for densification. I think there will be a very interesting conversation in the context of the citywide plan about what that densification entails and how you might do densification within phases of a corridor in different ways. But I am very confident that this level of density, which is actually, as we've called it in the past in Vancouver, gentle density, ground-oriented density, is the least level of density that will probably be aspired to in this particular type of corridor around the city. And I think through council's recent motion around looking at issues of air pollution on corridors, I think there will be a very robust conversation about how to do density in different ways. But I'm very confident that this level of densification is, as I say, the least of which that would be contemplated because of the very high order transit service as part of the city's remarkable frequent transit network. Frankly, we see many sites in the city where we are struggling to get the transit infrastructure. This is a place where the transit infrastructure is exceptional. What we are struggling to get is the land use that actually will provide greater ridership and facilitate mode shift to transit, which is such an important part of all of our goals. The proposal provides two badly needed housing types, rental housing and townhouses. And many will speak to that, but I particularly noted in reading council's recent report card on how well you've been doing achieving your own goals around housing types, that those two particular housing types, purpose-built rental housing and townhouses, you have fallen short on. We have all fallen short on. They were specifically noted in the report card as not meeting the city's goals and expectations. It just so happens that those are the housing types at play in this particular application. We've called that type of housing gentle density. We've more recently are referring to it as the missing middle housing because we lack it. But what it is, as Ms. Zhang did in her excellent presentation, it is ground-oriented housing that is an alternative to big detached houses on the one hand and mid-rise and high-rise on the other hand. So incredibly strategically important, not just for housing diversity, but for livability and choice within our city. The applicant not only meets the very challenging aspects of the interim policy, which I really need to emphasize are challenging. I was personally involved in 2 initial tries to have applications that would actually meet the requirements of the interim policy, and both applicants walked away because of how hard it is to actually meet all of the expectations of that policy. So I'm pleased that any project is able to actually navigate their way through the very high expectations. This applicant meets all those expectations and requirements, has a reasonable expectation that council and all of us will not move the goalposts on what expectations council actually put in place with that policy. But the application meets a lot more than that. It addresses, in its own way, housing diversity, transit ridership and mode shift, more complete communities where local schools and retail stand a better chance of surviving as communities are changing in Vancouver, aging in place through the facilitation of downsizing within your neighborhood. These are all issues that we have faced for years in Vancouver and are still continuing to struggle with. And not the least of which is Council's recent powerful declaration of a climate emergency, where you followed up with actions around advancing your mode shift targets, and this is about advancing your mode shift targets, and land uses that will get you to the place where 95% of Vancouverites can walk to their daily needs within 5 minutes. If you take those commitments seriously, these are the kinds of applications that the city needs, and we don't have all the time in the world in terms of how fast to actually achieve them. I say that because we don't always have the ability to wait for a citywide plan when actual projects meet your existing and very challenging policy. That, to me, is the bigger picture in terms of the policy context of this proposal. With regard to the specifics, the project architect is going to go through the details. Ms. Zhang did an excellent job already going through the design details. I will just say from my own perspective, the design is very well done in general in terms of how it interfaces with the back lane. I note that this is the most busy type of context that this policy applies to, and yet the applicant chose to not ask for the full density actually permissible under the policy of 4 stories throughout the entire site. And I think the design, the many, many changes that have been made to the design are excellent. There's been particularly a good job done both by staff and the applicant in terms of addressing the interface and neighborliness issues. And I credit staff for putting in the additional design development conditions. For those of you who are just learning the process around development permits that actually happen after council approves a rezoning, staff take design development conditions extremely seriously. And so I expect there will be a very robust conversation about further steps for neighborliness at the Urban Design Panel and at the Development Permit Board when the development permit is actually contemplated, because it's the Director of Planning's job to make sure that your design development conditions are adhered to. And staff have written very strongly worded design development conditions. I would note that if you think staff should go further, you have the ability to message that to staff, and you have the ability to even strengthen the wording of those design development conditions. But from my perspective, staff have already gone a long way to making sure that this design will continue to improve moving forward. The hospice has raised serious issues, and I have a lot of sympathy for the issues that they raised. I believe the actual application for the hospice came in under my tenure when I was at City Hall. And I believe the hospice should have been approved. But we're in an interesting place in the city and region where hospices are finding themselves in many debates around whether or not they are compatible with housing or with whether housing are compatible with them. And what I say definitively in my experience, in my practice, and my observation, that hospices are compatible with density in many scales, certainly this type of density. The suggestion that they are not inherently compatible is wrong. It's just wrong. And we've seen that through a simple review of the actual applications and projects that have been done around the region, where frankly much higher density is immediately adjacent to a hospice. Ironically, in those cases, the hospices had to make the argument that they were compatible with the density, and thankfully, we all agreed that they were. Now, ironically, we're getting the opposite argument here. To end, Council, I'll just say that I think there are many reasons to ensure that a very good job is done in this particular case, and opportunities that have already been built into the application to ensure that a very good job is done and continues to improve as you move forward. This isn't an either-or. It doesn't have to be an either-or. One reference in the media referred to this as a David and Goliath battle. I see no Goliaths here. I see two Davids who are both trying to do good things for the community, and I reject the notion of an either-or. I think there can continue to be improvement to make sure that there's a win-win for the public interest. Thank you. Over to the architect. Oh, you're next.
Thank you, Brent. Good evening, Mayor Stewart and members of council. My name is Virginia Bird. I am a principal at Pottinger Bird Community Relations, and we were engaged by the property owners in the fall of 2017 to support the applicant team in community and stakeholder engagement. I'd like to offer a quick overview of our engagement efforts over the last 18 months. From the outset, our planning team made a priority to engage with our immediate neighbors and community in an open and transparent way. In November of 2017, prior to our proposal becoming public, our team hand-delivered letters to our surrounding neighbors introducing the development concept and inviting a preliminary conversation to understand neighborhood priorities and concerns early on. Of the 20 homes we delivered letters to, we received responses from 2 neighbors who were interested in more information about our proposal. During this initial outreach in 2017, we also reached out to the Vancouver Hospice Society and scheduled a meeting with our design team to best understand what their concerns may be throughout this process. We met with senior hospice staff in early 2018 to tour the facility and discuss our proposal. At that time, we reached out and met with members of the ARCS, Arbutus Ridge, Carousel Shaughnessy Vision Committee, as suggested by staff, in December 2017, and again in March and April of 2018. We also reached out to the schools in the nearby vicinity, both public and private. Following a round of immediate neighbor outreach, our team hosted a pre-application open house in December of 2017 to present our preliminary scheme to the wider community and solicit input. The feedback received at this open house was fairly balanced. Of the 36 comments received, we determined that 56% or 20 people voiced support for the project, 38% or 14 people voiced concern for the project, and 6% or 2 people voiced neutral comments toward the project. While we heard from neighbors who were alarmed by the increase in density and tenure proposed, and from the hospice with concerns around privacy and construction, we also heard from empty nesters who could see themselves selling the family home, which could allow for new homeowners, hopefully with children, to keep local schools healthy, and downsizing to a new maintenance-free 1,700 square foot rental townhome within their community. We also heard from younger people who wished for the option to live in this neighborhood in the future in more attainable rental multifamily, as opposed to a costly single-family home. Over the following months, we continued to listen and presented a revised scheme in April of 2018 at the city's public information meeting that was reflective of community input where possible. We also met with members of the Shaughnessy Heights Property Owners Association executive in June of 2018. There has been a substantive amount of public correspondence submitted in the last week of this rezoning, which has been fairly balanced. Some 283 in support and 250 opposed as of last count. Over the last year and a half, the project has steadily increased in its interest. However, in our observations, the sentiments have remained somewhat balanced. We understand our neighbor to the south, the Vancouver Hospice Society, continues to have concerns, and if we get the opportunity, we remain committed to working with the hospice through these concerns as best we can, in particular around construction timing and management. On the other hand, our neighbor to the north, a 6-year-old custom-built single-family home, has provided a letter supporting the application, which is in your package. We recognize change is uncomfortable and construction can be impactful. Throughout this process, we have done our best to engage, listen, understand, and address our neighbors' concerns where possible, while also meeting the needs of the greater community and the goals and objectives set out in city policies. With that in mind, I would like to pass the microphone over to our architect, Neil Robertson, who will detail our design changes in response to neighbor and community input. Thank you.
I'm sorry, how do I move the slides forward and backward? Good evening, Your Worship and Council. My name is Neil Robertson. I'm the project architect for this project. We've been working on this project with our client, city staff, and in consultation with the neighborhood for approximately 2 years now. We've heard, I think, a pretty fair recap of our robust community engagement process that we've engaged in from our community relations consultant. So I'd like to focus on some of the results that we've had based on that feedback. One of the major concerns that we heard from the neighbors at the outset was that they deemed there to be insufficient parking. Although the application provided parking in conformance with the City of Vancouver parking bylaw, we heard concerns that the 25 proposed parking spaces was insufficient for the 21 units, given the family nature of the project. We were able to physically accommodate more below-grade parking on site, so we increased the proposed amount of parking to the 32 spaces that you see here now today. Another concern that we heard was the style of the project. Many people felt that the original contemporary design of the project was not compatible with the second Shaughnessy neighborhood. In response to that, we drastically reconfigured the building facades to be more in keeping with the materiality and architectural rhythm typically found in the neighborhood. You can see on the display there, we introduced a great deal of brick and natural wood claddings, more in keeping with what you typically see in second Shaughnessy. In our early meetings with the hospice, they expressed the concern regarding the noise associated with the coming and going of people and cars. Originally, our parking ramp was located adjacent to the hospice, their parking and loading, down here on the south side of the project, right there. Once we heard and understood that a lot of solemn moments occur in this location for them, we completely agreed. And as a result, we flipped the entire project so that the parking access was as physically far away from the hospice as possible. The current location of the proposed parking entry is now nearly 100 feet away from the hospice. You can see our entry is now right here. The hospice is located down here. It's approximately 100 feet. And approximately 30 feet from direct access to Connaught Drive. So you can see Connaught Drive is located right there. Now, next, there have been several changes mentioned by the city that have resulted in further consultation with the hospice from the city side. And we've made several changes that don't show up in your council report, specifically to address these concerns. As you can see on the south side of the lot, located all around here, we've introduced a large landscape buffer all along the south side. Previously in this area, there's a walkway and pedestrian parking access to the lane. The proposed layered landscape buffer will serve a dual purpose of providing visual screening at grade from our project to the hospice, as well as creating a quiet zone as mentioned by staff. Now, we have selected what we believe to be excellent trees and planting for the area, but we would invite the hospice to join with us in crafting the best tree and plant selection that hopefully would complement the beautiful gardens that they've got in the rear of their facility, at the front of their facility, to provide them with the optimal outcomes for this area. We were informed that the sounds of children playing could be negatively impactful to the operations of the hospice. As a result, we've relocated the children's play area from the south side of the project to the north side of the project. So you can see the children's play area used to be located in this area right here, and we moved it up to the north side there. We heard concerns regarding the height of our project. As a result, we've pushed this project as deeply into the ground as possible while still allowing for the compliant parking ramp access. This results in the project being approximately 40 feet in height, which is within 5 feet of what is permitted in the current RS5 zone. Additionally, we've cut the massing back on the top floor of the eastern block. This results in the top floor building being virtually invisible from the neighboring pedestrian view. You see, this is the area I'm speaking about right here. And if I jump forward a couple more slides, you can see right here, that's the location I'm speaking about right there. So this is the view from 5 feet above grade from the hospice point of view. And as you can see, the top floor on the front block is virtually invisible from that perspective. We heard and agreed that overlook was a major concern for this project. As a result, we've taken many steps to address this important aspect of the project. Firstly, we've eliminated the vision glass on the south side of the project. As an architect, access to daylight, in my opinion, is very important for livability. However, there's no reason that access to light means vision glass. We therefore have made all the windows on the south side of the project opaque to prevent any overlook from within the dwelling units. So all of the windows that face the hospice on this side right here, these are all now opaque glazing. Secondly, we've introduced a 6-foot-tall privacy screen on the south side of all the rooftop decks. Currently, we're showing soft-growing privacy screens. However, if the hospice would once again like to collaborate with us, we would be happy to provide whatever visual screenings they would prefer. You can see the screening located up there. Although there are no shadowing concerns as our project is north of the hospice, we heard that the access to the sky is an important aspect to the experience of the hospice. That is why we initially chose to locate our blocks away from the hospice building and created a central courtyard. We have further improved this situation by compressing the blocks and increasing the open space between the front and rear blocks. It's a little bit difficult to see, but I think if you look carefully, you can see this area here. This represents the outline of the hospice. So you can see that our central courtyard is located such that it's directly opposite the hospice. Also, incidentally, this red dashed line that you see here, this represents the maximum height envelope within the existing RS5 zoning bylaw. Now, although we've made all of these improvements, we do not believe that we are done by any stretch of the imagination. Our hands are out, and we're committed to working with the hospice and all neighbors to minimize the impact of this family-oriented rental development. Should this project move forward, we still have an entire development process ahead of us where we can continue to work with the stakeholders and address their concerns. Included in this process could be a good neighbor agreement, as the city mentions, between the proposed development and the hospice to alleviate noise concerns during construction, rather than relying on the noise control bylaw. Now, construction occurs on hospitals, care facilities, and hospices every day without requiring the closure of the facilities. Currently, my office is working on the expansion of a similarly scaled care facility in Qualicum Beach. And this facility is filled with very sensitive seniors, many of whom are near end of life themselves. Our construction manager on that project has been working out a comprehensive plan to minimize the impacts of the occupants, and nobody is being asked to leave. There was a question that staff kicked over to me regarding the children's access to the children's play area. We've spoken with the applicant, and they have no objections to sharing their children's play area with the hospice if they should so desire. And we've also been looking for ways that we can help augment this hospice as part of this project, to allow our project to improve the services the Hospice Act provides. Pardon me. As part of that, we've been talking with staff. We would like to look at the Canuck Place model and possibly provide one of these dwelling units for the hospice so they can provide places for family members to stay as part of their service. So there's a lot of people to speak, so I'll leave it right there, but I'm happy to respond, and the team is happy to respond to any comments or questions that staff may, or that council may have.
Thanks very much for your presentation. So we do have a lot of speakers here from council. In fact, I think we have 60. So I do have a long list of questions for staff, and I'm just wondering if we might, just a suggestion, we get right to the speakers, and then we would hold our questions for staff and applicants at the end of the speakers. People are okay? Generally getting a nod. Anybody opposed to that? Okay, great. So we'll start in with the speakers. So we have, I'll just read the first three names: Stephen Roberts, Josephine Baxendale, and Randell Moore. And it's up to 5 minutes. And there may be questions. And council, I'm going to clear this queue.
Yes.
We'll ask some questions later.
We'll do that first. Your Worship, I'm here speaking on behalf of the Vancouver Hospice Society, and we have more than 3 members present in the galleries, so we'd like to seek the 8 minutes that's provided for an organization.
Okay.
I am also joined by Simon Tabrizi, the Executive Director of the Vancouver Hospice Society. My name is Stephen Roberts, and I am the Chair of the Board of the Vancouver Hospice Society. I believe you all have a presentation on screen that we sent in earlier to the public hearing. You may already have taken a sneak peek at it, but I'm going to depart from my comments for the first part of my presentation just to speak to you a little bit about something we discovered today at Vancouver Hospice Society. We've been through a process with the hospice, and I represent an organization of hundreds, and that's had thousands of people over the last 14 years donate of their time and of their money and of their effort to give to this hospice, to create it, to build it, and to make sure that it opened. They now work to sustain the hospice. These are law-abiding people in the city who care about the kind of community we have. We've faced, in this opposition to this project, some unusual opponents. A developer who claims to be small-time, who has interests across the city in business and otherwise, with 2 highly paid professional public relations firms, and a number of people with websites that generate emails in opposition to send to council. Our people are looking for a process. Our supporters are looking for a process that respects the views of individuals.
I'm just going to stop you right there. This is a respectful process, and so it's not here to cast aspersions on the qualities of the people that you may not agree with.
I'm not casting aspersions. I'm just saying that we're a grassroots organization that's facing an uphill battle.
We can stop right there and just say you're a grassroots organization, but not to comment on the aspects that may or not be true of the applicant. So if you just go ahead with talking with your proposal, that would be great.
So the discovery we made today, and I'm going to ask our Executive Director Tabrizi to hand out a handout for you that we couldn't get sent in early on time, was in fact a website for pre-sales for this development project. This development project had Mike Stewart, a realtor, put up a website that says he plans to begin selling the units as soon as you guys approve it. My guess is that it was supposed to go up Wednesday morning after you approved it on Tuesday night and that somebody forgot. Apparently, the units will sell for $1,500 a square foot and up. Apparently, after this is rezoned, and you can look at the printout, you'll see you can live in the beautiful residency of Sonnesty, where you might not have been able to afford it until this development comes along. The staff report that we're presented with tells us, and all of us in the community have been told, that this is 21 units of secured rental accommodation. How exactly does 21 units for sale fit in with the city's plans? Now, we also understand that after a bylaw rezoning application has been received, various things happened. Financing perhaps doesn't come through, and other alternatives to financing have to take place. We're concerned as citizens that we've been playing by the rules and that perhaps this is not the application you think it is.
Sure, and I can assure you, sir, that we're adjudicating the application as it's come forward. That's if it's approved tonight. Of course, that's yet to be determined. That is what has been approved, not any other project.
And I need to point out to you what it seems to be that the final intent of the project is.
Sure, and we have plenty of time to, I'm sure that now that you've made this available to us, that we will ask the applicant and the planners after we've heard from all the speakers.
And I'm sure you'll be given some denials. But
sir,
today,
sir, I would just ask you to stick with the project and not to cast aspersions on the applicant.
I'm curious what the real nature of the project is.
Okay, sir. Look, please just comment on this project. We do not need aspersions cast on the applicant's integrity. This is a fair, respectful process. You've provided your information. Please stick with the application.
So the people of Vancouver Hospice also expect a fair hearing as well.
And that's what we're doing here right now.
So we're just making sure that it's clear that you have the information that is out there regarding this application.
We do. Thank you very much.
So we care for more than 150 patients at our hospice every year, plus their families. The slides are on the screen. Do I operate them from here? Yes. We have 8 private beds, and the current average length of stay is 2 to 3 weeks, where families often come together to reconcile, to speak with their loved ones, to maybe put aside past difficulties that families have had with each other, to express final messages of concern for each other, and to plan for what goes out afterwards. We employ 33 staff members and 5 physicians. We have 250 volunteers in 2 volunteer-run thrift stores and thrift boutiques. We serve Vancouverites from all walks of life, all ethnicities, all socioeconomic backgrounds. There's no charge to come to the hospice. We provide bereavement programs, grief counseling, and other supports for families. So why are we here? Well, a redevelopment application that exploits an interim rezoning policy to create luxury rentals or sales may displace terminally ill patients.
I have a point of order, sir. I'm just going to freeze your time. And Councillor DeGenova?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just very aware that we're in a quasi-judicial process, and anything that happens here that is legally challenged, we have to remember those are the people's tax dollars also that we're looking at legally. And just under talking about, I understand that speakers are supposed to talk about their opinion about the project in front of us, but to say that this exploits our own interim rezoning policy, I was just a bit concerned. I leave it up to you as the chair, but I just wanted to make sure that we weren't, by going on without a ruling on that, saying that we believe that this exploited the process that our staff have put forward.
Sure. So thanks. So again, sir, I've reminded you a number of times, mayor and it may not be sold is not the kind of language using here. We're just looking for your side of why you support this project and why it's good going forward. I have warned you a couple of times, and if it continues, I'll have to stop your time. Thank you.
So how would the development next door affect our hospice? Well, there'd be 21 neighbors instead of 1. There'd be 32 cars parked in the next door car garage, underground. There'd be 2 3.5-story tower blocks towering above the public areas of the hospice. There'd be congestion in the narrow lane that is the only access to the hospice. Ambulances, hearses would meet with garbage, recycling, and other service vehicles in the backyard. And let's not forget, this is a rental housing project. There'd be 21 units for rent, and moving vehicles would be a regular occurrence. This accounts for distress for families and residents alike. In the staff report, it stated that a number of consultations were made with the hospice and that accommodations were made. We think that the consultations need to be of a bigger nature and to reorganize the entire nature of the project. Moving an underground garage 40 feet is not a mitigation strategy. Moving a play area across the lawn of a single-family home is not a mitigation strategy. Adding a few plants to balconies and patios is not a noise abatement strategy or a reorientation. The scope and scale of this project needs to be changed. We've heard often that it has to be a 12,000 square foot house or this. Well, why is that? Why can't it be 2 houses or duplexes? The city's been rezoned entirely for duplexes. Why can't it be 4 infill houses? Why can't it be something that we can all work together on? Why can't the hospice buy the land and put something else that the community needs, such as some seniors housing or some bridge housing between long-term care and hospice? That's something we would be prepared to as well, and we had a realtor approach the developer to see if they might sell. Unfortunately, they didn't want to. This is an application under the Affordable Housing Choices Interim Rezoning Policy. Under that policy, the housing is supposed to be affordable. It also says in the preamble to this policy that rezoning applications will be considered when the following criteria are met. There's no guarantee that council will approve them. There's no obligation for council to approve them. They're considered if they meet the criteria. We think the project does not meet the criteria, contrary to what the staff report says, and we sent an urgent letter to council, I think on May 13th, expressing our concerns about that, and I think most of you will have seen that. It does not conform in terms of location and context. It's vastly overshadowing the neighboring properties. We can see the model on front of us in the table, and that's not like anything else in the neighborhood for 15 blocks in either direction. With expected rents upwards of $3,700 a month, and I think that's a fairly moderate guesstimate. Yesterday we were here, I should say Tuesday, we saw that on the east side with DCL waivers, 3-bedroom homes might go for $3,250. This doesn't have DCL waivers, there's no cap on rents, and it's in Shaughnessy, which is one of the more expensive areas of the city. So $3,700 seems a fairly modest rental, and 66% of these are going to be 3-bedroom, so that's the bulk of the units. This will do nothing to alleviate the shortage of affordable housing in Vancouver. So the city's definition of affordable rental housing really doesn't work in this context. We also note that Elizabeth Murphy in the Vancouver Sun questioned whether the city's housing targets were actually accurate. It seems that we may be requiring 3 times as many housing units as the population growth that Census Canada says we need. There's also a number of things that weren't in the staff report. Our missing petition, our online petition, which got no mention in the staff report, which is now well over 6,000 people. The staff characterized the informal...
I'm just going to ask you to wrap it up, sir. We've got about 30 seconds left.
Okay.
Thank you.
So what we're looking for here, I think, is leadership from council. You're a new council, and that's positive for the citizens of Vancouver. What we're looking for is some leadership, for some compassion, for some understanding about what kind of community this city should be. Is it one where developers rule the roost, or is it one where essential community services are protected and expanded and there for the people that need them as their time comes up? The views that are not in the staff report are that your own seniors planning advisory committee is opposed to this, and so too is your social planning department. Those things didn't appear in the staff report either. We think they should have.
Okay, and I've given you
thanks for your time.
An extra minute.
I appreciate it, and we'd certainly be happy.
And we appreciate the services you offer to the community. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming in this evening.
Thank you.
You do have questions, though. Councillor Kirby-Young, up to 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Roberts, thank you for coming in. I have a few questions because you had referenced a number of different types of alternatives. I think you referenced, for example, seniors housing, 4 infill housing, 2 duplexes, 2 houses, for example. So one thing that I've heard, and I'd like to hear directly from you, is, and I'll paraphrase, is that the hospice is against construction. So if I hear you suggesting different types of potential housing, is it fair to say that you're not against construction? Because that would engender noise, obviously, of any type of construction, different level, depending upon what goes there. So are you not against construction, is the first part?
So we're not against construction. I mean, I think we're concerned about the magnitude of the construction. A 32-car underground garage, I wonder how big the hole has to be and how much concrete you have to pour for that, how long it takes, and then to put the supports for these 3.5-story towers into that space and build them afterwards. How much noise and construction is that, as opposed to a house, which might have a small basement, or 2 houses with a small basement.
So it's fair to say your concern is, I'm going to keep going if that's okay, because we have a limited amount of time and I'm sensitive, we have people waiting. So your concern is more fairly characterized in terms of scale and type?
Absolutely.
Okay, and you had referenced, for example, what if it were seniors housing? So what might that look like in your view?
Well, we've had some discussions at the hospice board ourselves about could we find a way to serve the community and give something back by taking over the lot and perhaps providing intermediate housing between long-term care and hospice, where there's often a need. There's no imminent death threat there, but you can't stay home and look after yourself, and probably the trajectory is the same and you're going to end up in hospice, but are there people who need that kind of care? Another alternative, which I think you'll hear from one of our speakers later, is about an Alzheimer's village space where, especially catered for people with Alzheimer's, we're desperately in need of something like that. And you'll hear more about that later, I think.
Okay, I'm going to keep going now. You arrived or you opened, I think it's fair to say. I know you were working on financing and towards the site for a number of years, and I've had the pleasure of visiting the site, so I appreciate that, back last fall. But when you arrived in 2011, what was your understanding at the time when you made your application, which was conditional because you were new use to the neighborhood, in terms of what would be or was permitted at the time in and around you? Because you were new use going in, so I'm wondering if you can say what your understanding was at that time and what was conveyed to you.
So our application was not a rezoning application. It fit within the existing zoning regulations. It was just a development permit. We were asked to accommodate the neighbors, make it look like it fit into the neighborhood contextually. We were asked to keep it to 1 story above grade, and we did all of those things.
Okay, but I guess my question more was, what was your understanding of what would happen in the neighborhood or what was permissible in the neighborhood around you?
I mean, I think there was some concern. They thought it might be a little bit busier. That doesn't seem to have eventuated. People have discovered that the hospice can actually be a good neighbor.
You're actually answering another question that I had, not the one I asked exactly, but I appreciate
Sorry,
that.
I'm not understanding that.
Which was really about when you went in. I understand that neighbors thought, oh, this is going to be different. I'm sure there were a lot of similar questions that were raised around, will there be more traffic? There's more impact. This is different in our neighborhood. So you probably went through a similar process yourself, I'm guessing, with the neighborhood and the community, right?
Yeah, we did. Although, as I say, it wasn't a rezoning, so there was no public hearing. It was just us actually getting together with neighbors and hearing what their concerns were.
And did you make modifications in your plan in response to
Not sure that we made modifications.
I
I wasn't actually chair of the board at that time. I think we followed what we were asked to do, which was to make it 1 story. And
so I'll just loop back to my final question, the one I was just trying to get at earlier a bit, which was, when you came in and settled and invested, and I know there's a lot of heart put in fundraising, putting into getting the hospice off the ground, what did you understand was allowable around you in the rest of the neighborhood? Did you expect there would be change in that neighborhood?
No, we understood it was a single-family residential place with opportunity for a care facility of up to 6 beds, and that's what we built.
Okay, so clarification then, because you had said you'd contemplated potentially other uses even on the site next door to you. At some point, so that would presume that you thought that there could be some change allowed because you yourself had thought that maybe there's an opportunity with the site next door?
No, so next door, we were thinking we would be in compliance with what we did the first time and not require rezoning, that there may, and there are very early stage discussions about what could we do if we could, to prevent this from happening to the hospice, what could we do if we bought the lot? Could we do something that might serve the community that would fit in with the neighborhood better? That was what our thoughts were, and they haven't gone very far at all.
Okay, and you don't need to answer this, but that was the question that I had, if you feel comfortable, was had you considered purchasing the lot at some point, and did you not proceed for a specific reason? I mean, if you don't want to answer that, that's entirely up to you.
Well, we did have a realtor ask, and the developer said no, so we had considered that. We're also concerned about price because, we're a nonprofit that needs to, manage its dollars carefully, and so we'd be able to pay market price for that, and we've got a great banker in Van City who would help us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We're at 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Councillor Hardwick.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
There are a variety of different things that I'd like to ask you about. I am encouraged to hear that you would be open to other forms of development adjacent, that your concerns, and if I'm putting words in your mouth, please tell me.
Okay.
Your concerns are about the process, that if this had been a more fulsome process from the beginning that had contemplated a range of development instead of coming in with sort of a maximum site coverage and height and massing and then tweaking it down a little bit around the edges, you would have been more open to an active participation in this process.
Absolutely, that's a correct assessment.
So given your druthers, you would have us refer this application back and then maybe start from the beginning again and look at this from both sides in a more complete way rather than just trying to shoehorn it in.
I would agree.
Sorry, my word, shoehorn. I have to be careful about being descriptive and not derogatory.
Correct.
So you mentioned that you have felt that some of your input to council has not made it through properly. We used to be pre-internet, we used to run into things like busing supporters into meetings, and now we call it astroturfing. And just to be descriptive, would you feel that there's been an astroturfing campaign that you've been contending with?
Astroturfing?
Well, you mentioned that there were websites and information coming in that had potentially skewed the input.
Yeah, I mean, we just discovered an abundant housing website which had tick the boxes email that generates right into council, and we thought that generates a lot. And we looked at the feedback, and a lot of them come from that. When we were out here in the meeting room, the foyer on Tuesday at 8:45, a group of young people came barging in. They were pretty obnoxious. They were quite rude to some of our people who were waiting patiently.
There we go. We're not going down this road.
So what I'm going to ask of you is, because I am seeing a bit of a repetitive pattern here, I would like the information. You can send it to me personally or to all of council. I'm sure it would be appreciated.
Cannot send information personally. This is a public hearing, a quasi-judicial body. We have to have all information.
Fair enough. But I'd still, after this process is over, I'd still like to know, because I have seen a pattern develop here. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Actually would have to wait until after the bylaw is passed, if it's passed. So again, just to remind council, we are commenting on this specific project. We are not casting aspersions on other people's actions. We're not supposed to be
no, we were being descriptive, not derogatory.
I'm the chair, Councillor Hardwick. I'm ruling here. I'm just warning you to keep it within the blinds. Thank you. Councillor Deschanova, did you have a... Okay.
Questions?
Councillor Deschanova.
Thank you. And understanding the process very well, and it's different than council, you are welcome to send comment to all of council through the form on the website, and we will all see it and all review it. But one of us can't have information that others don't have. So
understood.
I hope that helps to summarize it. Okay, I got a thumbs up, so that's good. My questions for you are, and I appreciate you coming back again tonight. It's very legal hearing in that sense that we had to end, and I know that you were very close to being on the speaker's list before, so apologize that you had to come back again. My question is understanding from some of the follow-up information that I've just received, just to follow up on that. At the time, did you have to apply for a business license, the City of Vancouver? What's the process? I understand Vancouver Coastal Health, but what was your interaction with the City of Vancouver when the hospice chose to locate in the location it's currently in?
So we did have to apply for, I think, to run a residential care facility in the City of Vancouver, and as a charity, we also applied to be exempted or have very low civic taxes paid on the site. So the Vancouver City has an investment in this as well, in taxes foregone. But in terms of licensing, it's actually the provincial health authority that governs residential care that actually licenses these facilities.
At the time, was there any discussion about, or did the Vancouver Hospice Society have any thoughts or share with our staff, or were there any conversations at all about density in the neighborhood, or that there would be, if something like this were to come up in the neighborhood, that would be problematic, that construction or noise would be problematic? Did any of those conversations take place at the time?
I think the only conversations that took place were with councillors from the liaison group that liaises with Coastal Health. Carrie Jang, I think, is councillor at the time. It was, you fit in, you comply with the regulations, you fit in with the zoning, it should be good.
Well, Councillor Jang didn't share any information with me. Perhaps he did with Councillor Carr.
I think it might have been before your first term, but I'm not sure about that.
I was here last term, so...
Yeah, I think it was 2012 before.
2012, okay. I still haven't received any information. We got many updates. Councillor Carr was here, though. Maybe she received that information, but I see her nodding her head. I'm not allowed to ask her questions. Right now, considering, and I understand some of your comments that, you could see other uses for this, we have to treat this land as though it's not owned. This is not city land. This is not something that afterwards we have a decision on. It's zoned for a certain use, and we understand that use is, I think, a 10,000 or 11,000 square foot home. I will ask the applicant later what their intention is. If I'm allowed to ask, I'm not sure. I might have to ask staff if it's okay to ask what their intention is if this was not to pass tonight, which I've asked at other public hearings. May I ask you, is this preferable to what otherwise would be planned, and that what we've heard by our staff, it's zoned for right now, which would be construction of a large home?
So if you're talking about impacts on the hospice,
I'm asking if, is it just this, or is it construction of any type of structure on this site? Like, for instance, if they build what they're allowed to build now, that they don't have to come to us for public hearing for, I have to ask these questions.
Yep.
I only have you for a few minutes, so sorry if I'm being blunt and to the point.
as I think I expressed to Councillor Kirby-Young, I said we're not opposed to construction. We expect that there could be some construction, but the magnitude is the issue.
Okay, so what I saw in some of the presentation by the applicant was opaque windows. I'll ask if that would be the same case if they were to build a single-family residential home. I understand it would be a large home, as Mr. Todern said, but would you be concerned, are you concerned by the amount of people living in the space? Are you concerned maybe with the construction, the noise for that imminent amount of time?
I think the number of people is a factor when it's a 21-unit development, probably not when it's a single-family house. I think in the city, people tend not to like windows that are next door to their neighbors. People build houses that way. I mean, we couldn't make them, but I imagine they would do that. But my point is that it's not a binary choice. It doesn't have to be either or.
Just very quickly, I have to ask, if this was to go forward, would you want to see the permits expedited so that construction times might be working more with your group, but at the same time the project was to get finished quicker to make sure that there was less impact on the Vancouver Hospice Society?
Whatever gets built, we'd like it to happen quickly. We've already had people inquire about whether that's happening because they don't want to send their loved ones there if it is. We've got staff to look after as well as patients, so if we had to close for a time, that would be affecting our staff as well.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Councillor Dominato.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Roberts, for being here this evening. Just a couple of follow-up questions. I did hear through the questions my colleagues asked about sort of concerns and considerations around construction, but also scale and type and form. But I'm just curious, you touched on a little bit about some of the modifications that had been made. I'm just curious if you could expand. You seem to have some concerns about them, but were you satisfied or the board satisfied with some of the modifications that were made by the applicant in response to feedback in terms of what's proposed?
We thought those modifications were really tinkering around the edges. Moving the 32-car garage driveway entrance 40 feet down the lane didn't really do a lot for access for ambulances. I mean, a licensing requirement with the provincial authority is that you can get access to the healthcare facility. If there's moving trucks or recycling trucks or building equipment in the way, we could lose our license because we can't access the facility properly. Okay. And that's not something we're in control of. We're also not in control of who comes to the hospice. If people start to say and vote themselves, now we don't want my family to go there because there's so much noise going on, then we can't really stay open in those conditions, and we'd have to talk to Coastal Health.
Okay. Do you like if there? Do you feel there are other conditions you think that could be imposed that would be acceptable? I recognize that you're not comfortable with this form and the type, but are there other things in your view that could be done to mitigate and address concerns that be?
The height is a particular concern for us. Balconies overlooking an area where ambulances arrive and hearses depart, and families often gather to wave off their deceased loved ones. People are legitimately allowed to barbecue and have fun, but a barbecue party on a rooftop overlooking a hospice body departure just doesn't go together. And it's nobody's fault, but it just doesn't work.
Okay. And just a couple more questions. Given that we're in a situation where the current property owner could simply redevelop into as it's been described as a 12,000 square foot home, and there was a height that was not quite the same but comparable, and I'm just curious, is there concerns on the part of the hospice of the number of people? Because my experience is, and I live on a much smaller lot, but we're seeing increasingly sort of multi-generational homes with infills and secondary suites, and so you can have on sort of a 33-foot lot upwards of of 10 to 12 people living in a very small footprint. And I'm curious about, would you be concerned with the number of people? Was that ever a concern about the number of people that might be living adjacent to the hospice?
Not really. I mean, but large numbers of people obviously means more traffic, more interactions. So, but generally speaking, if it's 5 people or 10 people, it doesn't make a difference to us.
Okay. I'm just saying it's because, with some of the multi-generational homes, you're starting to see 12, in the larger. And I guess if this project were to be supported and approved, then there wouldn't be concerns with interactions. Would there be concerns with interactions with the neighbors, or do you feel that people would be respectful? I mean, there would be residents. I'm just saying if it was passed and supported. What are your thoughts on that?
I would hope people would be respectful, but again, we don't have any way of planning deaths or even the arrivals of patients.
Yeah.
So, I mean, people could have a festivity or something planned, and there will be deaths at our hospice. Sometimes there could be 2 or 3 in a day, and then none for a week or 2. So it's really difficult to say when that would work or when anything could be avoided.
Yeah, no, certainly I can appreciate that. Thank you for answering my questions. Appreciate
it. Thank you.
Thank you. On to Councillor Wiebe.
Yeah, thanks for coming in today. You talked about the parking hole and how large it would be. Would you be more accepting if it was back down to the 19 parking spaces, so there'd be less of a hole, or is the parking a significant component to this?
I think 19 is better than 32, but 19 underground parking spaces is still an awful lot. I don't know how big the hole has to be for that. I don't know how much concrete you need to pour. I just know it's a lot more than a house would involve, or even 4 infill houses.
Was that not a concern that they wanted more parking? Was that not a concern from your group?
We certainly didn't say that we wanted to have, maybe neighbors in the community said, get your cars off the street. Maybe that's what they said.
But it wasn't from the hospice?
It wasn't from the hospice.
Okay, and then there's also an interesting reaction when they talked about the playground. Can you talk a little bit about the movement of the playground and the reaction? Because it seemed like there was a different reaction from the group, and I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Is our executive director allowed to answer this? She's
yes.
With me. Yep.
I have worked at all hospices in Vancouver. Mays Place, Cottage Hospice, St. John's, Marion Hospice that is now closed, and now at Vancouver Hospice. I'm intimately familiar with how they emerged historically and how they integrated into the community. Cottage Hospice is built at a site that was built in 1905, I believe, as a place where infants who were abandoned were cared for. So it went through many changes. It became an abandoned building, and eventually people approached. You will know very. Yeah, that's right. So people at Mays Place, who had already established that hospice, approached the Parks Board and managed to convince them to lease that building and raise funds to build that building. That cottage hospice is about 20 meters away from a daycare center with a playground in front of it. It has never been an issue. They both have coexisted very, very beautifully. There is never any problems on the part of the hospice, the patients that are cared for there, the families, or people who are using the daycare for their children. So that's a perfect example of an integration. The daycare could design itself around the hospice after the hospice was built. Conversely, another example of a hospice that has integrated really well with a high-rise right next door to it is St. John's Hospice. That high-rise existed, and it has entrances and life within it that does not at all coincide with the hospice. The hospice managed to design itself, the building that it's in a way that is completely separated from the going-ons of the tower. So it's never an issue. Mays Place was developed at I think it's a 3-story building, not 4 stories. It's a 3-story building, and it was built for people with mental illness who needed support. When the crisis around HIV deaths arose in the downtown east side, the person who was the administrator at the time at St. James Community Services, whose name was May Guthridge, saw what was needed, and managed to assign the 3rd floor of that building partially to Mays Place. And Mays Place has existed there since 1990. So come to Vancouver Hospice, and you will see a beautiful building that was designed for a hospice, and it was situated in a single-family residential area, and it took extreme care to build the structure of the building in a way that would not interfere with the going-ons of the neighborhood. The neighbors were concerned at the time about many cars coming and going, and street parking, and having a hospice in the neighborhood. We now have neighbors who support us and donate to the hospice annually. And they express their support for the hospice routinely. You will hear from some of them here tonight. So all that to say that integration of hospices within urban centers can be done, but it has to be done in a respectful way.
Thank you very much. We're at the 5 minutes. Councillor Fry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, Mayor. And thank you for coming to see us and speak to us. I'm just sure, and actually thank you for the tip about the condo pre-sales. I did find it on Google Cache from 2 days ago, and on mikestewart.ca. So there was a listing for 4575 Granville condo pre-sales, which has shocked me because I, like you, was of the impression this was a rental project, and I think that's going to be some questions we'll have for the proponents when that time comes. That being said, I do think that this, I can appreciate that there has been some thought and effort going into how to make this work with you guys. Would it be safe to say that the biggest singular issue in this is going to be the construction phase and the impacts on the operations?
That's significant, but I think my slide on the impacts on the hospice were ongoing concerns. The moving trucks, the services for recycling, for garbage recollection, the vehicle traffic in and out of the parking garage, the people on their balconies, that's all ongoing. Construction will be way worse than that.
I think that the reality of the location that you find yourself in now is a quasi-urban setting. It's on Granville Street. It's a high traffic. It's a literal highway. And so there's, I'm sure that we all can appreciate that is the reality of life and death in the city. And that's, kind of how it is, unless you were able to buy a large pastoral setting that would preclude any of those kind of sundry urban noises. But I do worry that, I look at this project and I look at the scale of the parking specifically, and my familiarity with excavation alone, and that's almost a lot-to-lot subterranean parking spot on what's supposed to be a frequent transit corridor. Those all sort of are, I can certainly see, and I'm just wondering if we can try and kind of figure out a way around the construction impacts. Could that, I'm sure that we can find a way for you guys to coexist. For me, it seems like the construction impacts would be the one we really have to tackle to make things work. Would that be safe to say?
I think they're both considerable, but construction would be a nightmare.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. And that's it for questions. Point of information, Councillor Kirby-Young.
I have a point of information through you to the city manager, if I could ask for a clarification.
There will be, unless it's procedural, we do have questions for staff after we're finished the process that you could save or email in now.
Okay, thanks for clarification. I had sent it into the city manager and he suggested asking it after the applicant was finished, so I thought this was the appropriate time.
We can talk to the applicant afterwards as well, directly after we finish the hearing from the public.
It's actually for staff.
Sure.
Okay.
So thanks very much. Okay. Okay. Councillor Deschanova?
Thank you. My legal question is, Councillor Fry specifically said he found a listing. A listing has to have an MLS number. So I need to know legally, is there a listing for something that because if that's the case, then I would suggest we take a legal recess, because that means there's something out there that we haven't approved yet. That being said, if there is no actual listing, there's an advertisement.
We have plenty of time before we do our vote. We have a lot of people here to speak.
So legally, it wouldn't
We can
matter.
ask those
Okay.
questions when we get back to staff to ask the questions. Right now, we're hearing from the public. Thanks very much. So 59 speakers left to go. Josephine Baxendale and Randall Moore. Ms. Baxendale, up to 5 minutes, please, and you may have questions.
Thank you, Your Honor. My name is Josephine Baxendale, but for disclosure, I am also known as Joe Scott B. I sat on the Heritage Commission for 4 years as Joe Scott B, and I have done a lot of city business, and I work as an artist as Joe Scott B. Your Worship and councillors, thank you very much for allowing us to speak to you tonight. I first heard about this development proposal early last year at the ARCS meeting, which Jim Hall chairs. He spoke to you on Tuesday night, and I would like to once again mention that at the ARCS meeting it did come up that this is market housing, not any subsidized or social housing. What Jim Hall did not mention was that at that ARCS meeting we also discussed the fact that 3-bedroom units, such as are in this proposal, make perfect Airbnbs. The Vancouver Hospice provides a valuable health asset to the City of Vancouver. We recently had a close family member die at home of ALS, a cruel degenerative neurological disease, and his other choice would have been to die at this hospice. I personally have a degree in design, and I understand plans and models. I served, as I said, 4 years on the City of Vancouver's Heritage Commission, and during that time I reviewed many projects and spoke to numerous architects. I have met with this architect, Neil Robertson, in his office, and many of the things that I was going to speak about tonight have already been covered, so I really don't want to bore you with the same subject again. However, I do want to emphasize that these 2 buildings proposed next to the hospice will disrupt this peaceful retreat, whose site was carefully chosen in a quiet residential neighborhood at a time when no such development would have been considered. I respectfully submit that even a 12,000 square foot residence would not have as many people residing there as there are in a 21 unit complex, nor would such a deep hole be dug on the property line. We've already talked about the fact that this is going to create a huge hole. You've talked about the fact that the parking lot will be, a huge excavation. So I don't want to go all through that again, but I do feel strongly that this is an exceptional building and an exceptional site with the hospice next door. It's not the same as a 12,000 square foot house. I can't imagine that, when you look, I'm very visual, so to me, a square block building, 2 of them, are nothing like what would be asked of a design for a house, which, as you could see in the sketch that the architect showed of the shadow of the hospice, it's a carved away shape. It's not a solid block. I also brought pictures of the lane, because the lane has been under discussion. So I don't know if I can submit them or not. But the lane is an unusual lane in that it comes along and it makes a right angle turn. People, when you talk about a lane, and I've noticed that on all the plans that were shown, the lane is shown straight. The fact is that on the other side of the hospice, it makes a right angle turn, And there are garages built right up to the edge of that lane. So it's not as if that lane could be widened to accommodate 2 cars. I took a picture of a car on the lane behind the proposed site. And when a car, an ordinary car, is on that lane, you cannot pass it. So it's a one-way lane. I don't know how staff and everybody will figure that one out, but it is a challenge, which I'd like to bring to your attention.
Just 30 seconds left.
Sorry?
Just 30 seconds left.
Okay. Well, the other thing I wanted to talk about quickly was that 47 people attended the first public hearing, which a lot of us didn't know anything about. There were over 350 people at the second public hearing, and the changes to the design when I met with the architect in the summer had only been made following the first public hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in. And you have no questions? Thank you. Nope, no questions for you. Thanks very much. Randall Moore, Joel Keloff, and Karen Fleischman. Mr. Moore?
Good evening.
Hi, up to 5 minutes.
Thanks for allowing me to speak. My name is Randy Moore. I have a little different perspective on some of this because I'm a physician that does palliative care, mainly at end of life. All of these hospices I work in. I see this a little differently than the folks that have been talking about technical things. I'm married to an architect, and I was hearing these echoes of the architect putting his perspective on things. And I understand that these sorts of issues need to come before you, and you need to make up your mind, but I feel that I don't support this application for reasons that are perhaps a little different. I'm not an employee of Vancouver Hospice, although I work there once in a while, generally every couple of months. I'm not a resident of Shaughnessy, but I am familiar with each of the hospices. And as I listen to people, it's interesting because my perception of hospice and community is quite a bit different oftentimes. And I think one of the problems that happens is, you know, when you're young, you know you're going to die, but it's kind of off in the future, and it's an intellectual exercise. As you get older and you have family facing this, it gets more in your face, and you realize it's an emotional, spiritual, and existential exercise in how you see yourself in the community and how you're moving on through that. So I think what strikes me about all of these hospices, and they're quite different because they serve different communities, I think what defines them a lot is not only the population and the community that they're in, but the fact is it's the volunteers and community support that make them each unique. And this is part of the community looking out for folks at end of life. And while there seems to be opposing views about things, clearly a number of my development citizens on my right here, they're going to die too. So we're all going to have to face this as a community. And I believe this is a very important thing because the ministry has indicated that they're going to be pushing more and more services into the community. And clearly that's where they should be with a lot of chronic disease, end-of-life care, that type of thing. Clearly, all of us are interested in more affordable housing for the city, given the issue that it is. But who are we as a city? While the human condition may make dying inevitable, we're all in the same boat here, and this is part of the struggle to come up with a resolution of this sort of thing. What is unique about hospice is that community is key to this. It's how it works. They get funding from the coastal health region, but it's all about the community and the volunteers. Is there any middle ground? I would have said middle ground is I would, as a developer, would have come along and said, look, how can we make this work? Let's, maybe we can put in 4 or 5 more hospice beds, combine the two. I can build whatever I need to build. That might have worked. But I don't think right now, the way it is, there seems to be a lot of middle ground in this sort of thing. So this philosophical issue is going to happen again and again because you're going to get more services being in the community. How are you going to fit them into the community? Are you just going to densify? Well, clearly you're going to densify. How much of that is going to occur? What I want to say is, you know, back in the 60s, Joni Mitchell was singing about they paid paradise and put up a parking lot. Well, that was part of the ethos of the 60s and 70s. Car was king, development was happening. I would hate to see in your quest to densify the city and accommodate the necessary housing needs, I would hate to see that become true once again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Great. We're on to Joel Kaloff. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you, Councillor Weep. Sorry, sir. You do have a question?
Yeah, thanks for coming in.
That was my timer. Shut it off. Anyhow, sorry about that, folks.
Okay, you've got a question here from Councillor Weep.
There was talk of one of the units in the proposed project to be utilized as a bed, right? Or a room that could be utilized by the hospital.
Family, folks, and...
Yeah, what do you think about that?
Certainly seems a step in the right direction of trying to address the whole problem of what goes on. I think that clearly what I worry about is that if we are too much put this in the face of how this densification happens, you're going to piss off all these volunteers. They're going to quit volunteering, and then there's nobody. I worry that the engagement of the community has to continue to happen. And if things like that help it, I'm for it.
Okay, and you talked about paving over Paradise. This back component of the hospice is all paved. And there is an option with extra parking spots next door. Could there be a win-win of having some of the parking spots next door and putting in a garden or something in the back that kind of enhances the space instead of having currently, which is an electrical box, a garbage bin, and 6 parking spots?
Yeah, there may be a bit. I'm truly, I look after the folks, and we struggle with those concerns. So I may be the wrong guy to ask about that. I do know that it's always a struggle in all of the hospices about everything from parking on down, except for Rax, Mays Place, because its community they have no cars. They tend to show up walking.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks so much. Okay, so we're on to Joel Kaloff. Joel Kaloff. Hey, Karen Fleischman. See somebody coming? Hello, are you Karen Fleischman?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I have up to 5 minutes. Why don't you get situated there? Thanks very much. Go right ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Fleischman, and I've lived in Vancouver most of my life. I'm a resident in the Oak Ridge area, and I come to this meeting quite concerned on a slightly different scale to what's been discussed until now, and that is looking at the whole cityscape as a whole.
I guess get you to move a little closer to the mic so we can... This one? There we go.
Okay. What I'm afraid this project might do, if it gets accepted, is to set a precedent for the entire area on Granville Street between 16th Avenue and 41st Avenue, which I think is a very valuable green, low-density thoroughfare on what is a highway. I think we need to keep a lot of aspects of the transportation issues in mind, especially commuters going from downtown to Richmond and further, locals using that strip, tourists coming in from the airport. It's quite a crucial area because if you're coming north on it, past 41st Avenue, you have a hill and you get a little bit of a sense of the greenery of Vancouver. If that whole strip gets built up, I'm just very concerned that it'll become like Oak Street and Cambie Street, and do we really want to have high density on all our arteries? So that's my main concern, that if you accept this project, you'll have to accept all the other applications along that strip. So my other proposal, which is perhaps a little too bold, because I find the hospice is a gem of a project, is to put a hold on all building applications adjacent to it and even across the street of it on Granville Street, to keep that as peaceful a place as possible for as long as possible. And so that's, I think, mainly it.
Great. Thanks very much for coming in this evening. There's no questions, so we'll move on to the next speaker, who is Rhonda Tuyp, T-U-Y-P. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your last name. Okay. You're from the Hospice Society as well?
I'm from the Hospice Society.
Okay. Great. The clerk will help you with those. Please go ahead.
My name is Rhonda Tuyp. I oppose the rezoning of 4575 Granville Street from RS5 to CD1. Mayor Stewart and council members, a 3.5-story, 21-unit townhouse structure with 42 doorways, 21 patios, and numerous windows will provide the residents of this development a 24/7 visual access to our private garden sanctuary and the bedrooms of our patients. Indeed, the renters on their porches will have an unobstructed visual surveillance of our patients every day in their everyday lives. An intimate intrusion on the suffering and grief being shared amongst loved ones. The construction of this development is not appropriate next door to our hospice, not for our patients, and not for the potential renters, who will no doubt feel very uncomfortable as they sit on their porch, vicariously taking in the drama next door. To add context to my argument, I would like to point out, this is a little high. I'm actually kind of, could you just bring it? Thank you. Thanks. To add context to my argument, I would like to point out that the VHS hospice was built in the heart of Shaughnessy, not to seek an elite position in society, but to seek a peaceful neighborhood that would bestow a tranquil setting on for our patients and families to spend time together. Much like the hospice at Canuck Place on Matthews Avenue or Ronald McDonald House on Pine Street in Shaughnessy, our location was chosen specifically for its peaceful setting and neighborly seclusion. The vision of a freestanding hospice home was born early in 2002 when our two founders decided that their palliative patients deserve better options for their final days. What came to mind was a private, serene living space that would make people feel like they are home, while being cared for by a knowledgeable, compassionate care team. The VHS vision was to raise enough money to build a freestanding hospice, a home away from home for families wishing to care for their loved ones to the end, but not able to endure the caregiving required. As a palliative nurse in those days, I was well aware of the shortfall the healthcare system imposed on caring for the dying. End of life was typically the recipient of compromise, making the provision of wholesome, compassionate care a challenging task. After 10 years of hard work and fundraising, the Society purchased our property on Granville Street in 2012, and the architects, Rossich and Hempel, designed a structure in accordance with the zoning guidelines. The hospice home was built with basement offices to ensure our patient bedrooms were open to the garden sanctuary. There's a picture that I've circulated that shows the basement, how the hospice is sunken down. We officially opened our doors in April 2014. Vision, time, perseverance, and hard work has built this hospice, and now the very heart of our mandate to provide compassionate care is threatened by the proposed housing development next door. In response to the proponent lobbyists we heard from on Tuesday, overstating the normalization of death and dying and their neighborly relationship with a hospice 100 feet away from them, I am very familiar with the Cottage Hospice and St. John Hospice, both of which were built with a buffer of 100 feet around them. I respond to the 100-foot endorsement by distinguishing in the photographs the vast difference between 100 feet and the 30 feet, which will separate our hospice from this proposed development. I have photographs taken of the hospice juxtaposed to the building next door to highlight the proximity of 30 feet between our buildings.
Just 10 seconds left.
In contrast, I've also taken a photograph of the construction site 100 feet away that delivers, that has been going on for 3 years.
Thanks very much, and that's the 5 minutes. Okay, we do have a question from Councillor Weeb, though.
Yes, can you explain to me what window is in this picture here?
That's on the, that window faces the existing house in the lot which the proposed development will be going on. That is a north-facing window on the hospice, looking out on the south-facing window of the building next door, which will be replaced by the proposed development.
So currently the proponent's house has a window that directly looks at the hospice.
Correct.
And the proponent is now looking at having windows that would not face directly onto the hospice. Is that correct? And would be further away. So the new...
There would be windows, but I think the architect said that they will be frosted windows. But the patios will be high up and overlooking the hospice and the hospice garden.
But currently, is there any issues with this window staring at the hospice?
Well, that used to be behind a hedge, which was removed. So we didn't really have any choice. It wasn't there when the hospice was built. There was a hedge there.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, and that's it for questions. Okay, we have Chelsea Dill, Rebecca Fry, and Graham Heel. You Chelsea Dill?
Good evening. As mentioned, I'm Chelsea Dill. Thank you, Your Worship and Council, for allowing me to speak today. I'm a director for the Vancouver Hospice Society. I'm one of the newest directors. I've only just joined in November. And if I'm being completely honest, when I first joined, I wasn't sure what all the fuss was about with respect to this development. As a millennial and as a young renter in Vancouver, of course, on face value, the thought of more rental housing in the city, especially an area like Shaughnessy, which is quite central, sounded great. But as I I learned more both about the development and some of the very interesting and concerning information that's come about within the last 24 hours. It made me sorry, let me start again. It made me a bit concerned, but I won't speak to that. As was mentioned, this is a quasi-judicial hearing, and I certainly don't want to be deprecating. So I'll move over to us as a hospice. So as Dr. Moore mentioned earlier, one of the things that hasn't been talked much about is the aspect of community. And now, of course, you've seen the models, you've heard from the architect, you've seen photos of our facility. But one of the things that the models and the photos don't get across is the sense of community and what these people have built. This started as two ladies sitting at their dinner table having tea, talking about how we could provide compassionate end-of-life care for people in Vancouver. And they, being from the UK, were of course familiar with these community models of hospice and decided that they wanted to bring that to our city. As mentioned, there are different hospices that already exist, and as mentioned as well earlier by Dr. Moore, there's choice that people make in terms of where they want to spend their final days. So we have a palliative access line here in Vancouver where when a patient is determined to be palliative, they phone in and they're able to find out where there's available beds. As was mentioned, there's 36 beds in Vancouver. We have 8 of them. I think one of the concerns, and certainly if I was a councillor, I would want to know if this goes ahead, if this development next door goes ahead, will we close? We won't close by choice, but what may happen, and I think what many of our concerns are really worried about, is that people will stop choosing to come to our facility. And as Vancouver Coastal Health mentioned, we do have a funding agreement, but if people come to our facility to tour and determine if they want their loved one to die in our facility, and they're hearing cranes or excavators or jackhammers and whatnot, and they're thinking about some of those conversations that our chair mentioned, many families, they're reconciling in the final days, they're saying their goodbyes, and that's interrupted, by noise. And of course, if there was a fire, as was mentioned on Tuesday, we would not begrudge anyone from rebuilding their home. But I think rebuilding a home and rebuilding and building a 21-unit facility is very different, and the length of time the construction would take would be very different. So to reiterate some of the things that were already mentioned, and I'm going to be a bit scattered because I'm aware that my time's coming up, and it was mentioned around the playground. We've never said that a playground would not fit with our facility. Of course, it's choice for people to stay. So if you're someone who doesn't want to hear kids playing, well, maybe you don't choose our facility and we can't control that. Again, we're not opposed to all construction, but we would like to work in consultation, and we think something like a duplex or a four home infill might be a little bit more reasonable within the space. I think as well it was mentioned that there was one round of revisions that were made to the plans, but after the second open house occurred and over 300 people attended that, there was no additional revision made to the plan. It felt very much like lip service. So if there were some more substantial things that we could look at. It was mentioned that noise mitigation would of course have to factor in, sharing of the alleyway. Now, licensing was something that's been raised several times. Could we lose our licensing if this development went ahead? If there's obstruction to the laneway, which again is a one-way, dead-end laneway, then we may lose our license, because if we have to share that space with moving trucks and garbage trucks and people in and out of the facility, and if there's an ambulance that needs to come in, that could cause a problem. As well, I know there was mention that perhaps construction could be paused while people were saying goodbye to their loved one and a hearse was coming to collect a body. I'm not sure the practicalities of that, if I'm being honest. What type of process would we put in place to go next door? There is no rhythm to death. There is no schedule to death. People may sleep all day and want to be up all night, and if there's construction occurring, then of course that could interrupt that. So anyways, I see the red light flashing. Thank you very much for listening, and I appreciate you have a lot of stakeholders to consider.
Thanks very much. And you have a couple of questions, Councillor Boyle.
I'm just hoping to clarify that hospice provides services at no cost or low cost?
So my understanding is it's $35 a day through the MSP, And then for certain instance cases, we do have relief, and it would be no cost to those individuals.
And do you, it's also my understanding from my previous work that there's a huge shortage of hospice beds
Massively.
in the city. So do you have a waiting list usually, or how, I mean, not that you can be on a waiting list. Like, I guess I'm trying to get at, I hear the concern that people might not choose to spend the last days of their lives there. And also I hear that there's a huge need for the service. And so I guess I'm trying to figure out how much that a building next door would weigh next to the other option being a hospital, or like, I'm just trying to get a sense of that concern of longevity for the facility.
Sure, yes. So as mentioned, the placements are managed by the Palliative Access Line, which is run by Vancouver Coastal Health. We, as well as Mays Place and St. John's and the Cottage, the other hospices that were mentioned, when there are available beds, people are able to go and view them, and they have to make those decisions quite quickly. My understanding, sometimes within 24 hours. And so if there's only 36 beds and your loved one is, again, it's less than 30 days. They've been given a window to when they can expect to die. So these people are in high stress situations. Obviously, they're about to lose a loved one. They're touring facilities. And if it were me and I was looking for somewhere for my mom or my spouse to die, and I toured it, and there's concrete being poured and construction workers going to and from, I'm not going to choose that place. So maybe I'm putting my loved one at risk because I'm keeping them at home when I can't adequately care for them, or maybe they remain in an acute care setting in a hospital, quite frankly, receiving access to care that they actually don't need, because there's a difference between treating symptoms and providing compassionate end-of-life care, pain management.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I know a fair amount about hospice, and I'm a big fan of it. I guess the construction phase, I understand but the post-construction, hopefully very long life of the hospice, it just seems like, considering the huge shortage of hospice, that the concern about nobody choosing to go there doesn't. I'm having trouble wrapping my head around that one.
Okay. Well, and certainly people have choice. So maybe we're being oversensitive. And that's fair. We're very passionate and emotional about this. This has been decades of people's hard work. So that, of course, that could be the case.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Sorry, my microphone just broke. I'll just hold it up. Sure. Just a quick clarification on that. And I'd ask the same question, and I just want to be really clear on this, is that because I had heard representatives of the hospice in the media talking about the fact, and I think the statement was made, and I did hear it more than once, that the hospice will have to close, not might close. So you're saying, just to be very clear, that you're not, that's perhaps an overstatement. It's more that you're worried that there might be less demand.
I think from our standpoint, of course, we can't make any assumptions until we know what the decision is going to be and how we would move forward. But at this point, in my meetings on the board, we've had no discussions that indicate that, yes, this will happen. And in listening to Stephen and Simmons speaking earlier, we've got no intention to my knowledge.
I appreciate the clarification, because I did hear that in multiple interviews. So it's great to hear that directly from you, from Mr. Roberts, stated on the news. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we're on to Rebecca Fry, Graham Hill, and Del Catherine Whelan. Are you Rebecca Fry? I
am.
Great, thanks. So please, up to 5 minutes.
I'm Rebecca Fry, and I am born and raised in Vancouver, and I still live pretty much close to where I was born, actually. I'm opposed to this development, and I don't speak from any, technical way at all. I speak from personal experience. My mother was there a couple of years ago, and a friend of 30 years was there earlier this year. And I read a comment in one of the interviews or one of the articles, and it said, what's the big deal? Sorry. The comment said, what's the big deal? And it just made me realize that, unless you've actually been there, and even probably 6 months before I was there, even probably the week before that we went into that situation, I had no idea what I was looking at. And my parents, my father died at 92 and my mother was 98. So you would think, oh, I would probably know better. But I didn't. She was a vibrant woman. And then, life happens or death happens. And that ability for me to pop in and see her, because there's lots of parking on that side street. I could pop in there if the visitors' parking was full or the lane was never blocked. I had nothing. So, on my way to work in the morning or for coffee or for tea or for whatever time, I had easy access. And now that may sound like a really small thing, and it may sound like it's really unimportant, but when you're juggling so many things, just being able to get there, to be with her, was critical. And I'm really sorry, but anyway, I was at home before we came into the hospice. I was at home with Mom, and she was in palliative and she wanted to come home, so I was given fentanyl, hydromorphone, and morphine at home with her. I was taught how to inject it into the port, and here I am at home with all these drugs. I had a nurse come in once a day, but I was there while we were expecting her to die in 2 or 3 days. 10 days later, because death is not like a straight line process, 10 days later, I'm still in the same situation. I was at my wit's end. Lucky for me, I have a sister who is a researcher extraordinaire, and she found the hospice for us. And it was like, Mom wanted to be at home, but this was like being at home, as close to being at home as possible. But I was able to get rid of that nursing duty and that huge responsibility with those incredible drugs and allow professionals to do that, and I could be the daughter again. I could just be the daughter. It's such a critical component of our society. And as much as we need to look after the young people and provide affordable housing, we also need to look after our aging. We need to provide them with a place to die that's comfortable, that's private, with dignity. We need to have those places for the family and for the dying. Our population is aging, and so there are more and more people in need. So my experience is going to become your experience. And that needs to be, considered. So we all need to live together, but this is not something to take lightly. It's not something to ignore. And as a society and a city and a community, we need to think of our seniors as well. Thank you.
Thanks for your time this evening. Graham Heel. Not here? Okay. Thanks very much. Del Catherine Whelan. Thanks for coming. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members.
If you just make sure you're close to the mic, that would be great.
My name is Del Whelan, and I'm a volunteer with the Vancouver Hospice Society for the last 16 years. And I'm here this evening to voice my opposition to the planned 21-unit building with an underground parking lot for 32 cars next door to the hospice. Now, I know many of you on council before the election took the time to come and visit our hospice, and verbally offered your support and understanding of the dilemma the hospice was facing, and we were grateful you took the time to visit. I'm here to advocate for the patients and their families. And yes, I want to tell them that there will be a hospice bed for their loved ones when they are near the end of their lives and need hospice care. They will be treated with respect and dignity, peace and quiet, free of loud noises, jackhammering, dust, etc. And instead will be able to sit in the lovely gardens, listening to birds singing and enjoying their surroundings. These will, after all, be the last memories their loved ones will have. There are many places this development can be built. We do not have the option of moving. Vancouver Hospice is a unique place that was built by the community for the community. Your citizens worked tirelessly to raise the funds to build the hospice, to make Vancouver a better place. There are other possibilities that have been presented here tonight that really could contribute to your goals of making Vancouver a more livable city for everyone. You have a choice. Please, please refuse this application. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. And you have a question from Councillor Wiebe.
Yeah, just a quick question, because you talked about the location. If we were looking at this reverse, would you agree that we should approve a hospice beside a townhouse development? If that were the question today. Obviously, we're having an aging population and we need to increase the amount of hospice spaces. Would you support us putting a hospice in a location like this?
In a location like it is now?
Like, no, right now, say that, looking at this differently, say
right,
today
if this
was a
building
hospice.
was there before us, if
yes.
this building was there before we were here, I think we would probably have considered very carefully where we would have put it. I think has been mentioned quite a lot tonight. This spot was chosen very specifically because really for us it was, we did not want an institution. We specifically kept it to be a very small home-like setting. Yes. That was hugely important. So we were quite happy when we couldn't have 2 stories or we couldn't go, any higher, because really we wanted, if you honestly come to our hospice, it's very difficult to get an idea for all of you, unless you've been to our place, to see just what it's like. You can look at the plans are beautiful. I don't really understand plans, but I think if you see it, we don't even have a sign out on Granville Street that says the Vancouver Hospice. It is so much like a home. And that was really what we wanted, to create a home away from home. It is lovely there. I would want to die there myself. So, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have Larissa Shuala. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Larissa Shuloa. Okay. Thomas Crean.
I actually have copies of my presentation for each of the council members.
Thank you.
And since I did my own secretarial, I apologize for 2 typos, which I corrected.
We'll forgive you.
$29. I'm 29, yeah. Dear Mayor and Council, thanks so much for hearing our concerns. My name is Tom Crean, and I'm actually here to speak in favor of this proposal built anywhere else, but not beside the Vancouver Hospice. I'm vice president of a society called the Partners in Care Alliance, and that society was formed in partnership with Reverend Bernice Gerard, who the Vancouver Sun said was our most influential religious leader of the 20th century. back in 1994 because she called me and told me that the city of Vancouver was contemplating privatizing our only cemetery, Mountain View. Anyway, I began working with the end-of-life caregiver community in earnest. By the way, my grandfather was Tom Kearney, and my family today owns the one and only real funeral home in Vancouver that's either family-owned or Canadian-owned. Anyway, back to subject. I've spoken here to the city as both a concerned citizen and as an expert in funeral and cemetery matters a number of times. And I served for 3.5 years, too, on your seniors advisory committee. So I just want to say, in hearing application after application after application, I can tell you that half the seniors worship children and the other half have had enough, just for the record. I'm also, by the way, the immediate past president of the Surrey Hospice Society. So on behalf of both our partners in care, the PICA and Surrey Hospice, I speak to you with serious concerns about the above rezoning in my neighborhood. I live just 8 blocks south on the same side. And by the way, our hedge blocks the noise very well. So just to proceed, I'd like to just start with a couple of definitions. The first is the term palliative care, which we see as basically symbiotic with hospice. And palliative care emerged in Canada in the mid-1970s as a far more efficient, far more caring and cost-effective means of reducing suffering while improving the quality of life for people living with end-of-life care issues. It provides for pain and symptom management, including psychological, social, emotional, spiritual, and practical support. It's for families and the families of the caregivers during illness and especially after the death of the person cared for. At Surrey Hospice, the lineup of people needing support from these opioid crisis and things like that, it's just the demand for hospice care is exploding. And hospice, of course, is a home-like environment. In 1976, my mother, Ellen Kearney Crean, was asked by the BC Cancer Agency to sit on a committee to research the feasibility of bringing hospice to British Columbia. In 1993, BC opened its first hospice. 17 years it took to wind its way through our healthcare, I don't know what to call it, maze. We'll call it a maze. So I bring this up because in consideration of the development on the exact border of our hugely delicate ecosystem, it shows how slowly Vancouver society is coming to understand the real huge needs of proper end-of-life care. Ironically, today, BC has 55 hospice societies. The next biggest number of hospice societies of any province in Canada is Alberta, and they have less than half the societies we do. In December 2017, the federal government passed a bill, formerly Bill C-277, calling for the Minister of Health to create an integrated framework for palliative care across Canada, integrating all 3 levels of government. That very much includes our cities.
And we're just about 20 seconds left, please.
Oh. Well, then I better go to the climax here. Okay, so palliative care is a shared responsibility. Hospice is an essential component of that care, and we sincerely hope that the city protects Vancouver Hospice. And by the way, I also was invited to Chilliwack to tour BC Housing's new subsidized housing complex, 4-story building. It was modular. So if hospice could survive beside 21 townhouses, and I don't know the answer, they built that building, that 4-story building in Chilliwack in 4 days. So maybe there's an alternate way to construct it so that they wouldn't be under this burden for the next 2 or 3 years.
Thank you very much,
Your Worship.
Yep, and no questions. So thanks for your presentation. Teresa Juba, number 30. Teresa Juba. Teresa Juba, and 31 would be Noel Heron, 32 Douglas Knight, 33 Sue Hurd. Thanks for coming. Up to 5 minutes.
Thank you.
This is Teresa Juba. Number 30.
Good evening, Your Worship and councillors.
I just move you to move a little closer to the microphone. That would be great.
My name is Teresa Juba, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I'm a resident of Vancouver, and I am speaking against this rezoning application. Part of my context in speaking is going through end-of-life care with both my mother and, more recently, my father. In terms of the proposed project, I believe there are so many more suitable sites in Vancouver for the project the applicant is proposing. We are so fortunate to have such a vital resource in our city, and I feel the Hospice Society, the Vancouver Hospice staff and volunteers are experts in what conditions support the work they carry out for those who are approaching compassionate end-of-life care, and I think their comments need to be taken very seriously. I feel we should do everything we can to protect the hospice as a vital resource in Vancouver. That protecting this resource is a reflection of our higher values, that we advocate for those who are vulnerable and dying, that we value dying with dignity, that there is healing in allowing the dying to do so with dignity, and that healing extends to the families of the dying. I was speaking with a member of the society, which I am not, and I just had a few interesting numbers. If you looked at the 21 homes in the project, the proposed project, and if there was an average of 4 individuals in each of those homes, that would be approximately 84 individuals. And the hospice receives 150 individuals a year that come to die. And in the 7.5 years since their operation, that would amount to 1,125 citizens that they had cared for. Of course, these are approximate numbers. That's pretty significant. And I asked that, as our representatives, I ask that you consider the value of that the hospice brings to our society and the citizens of Vancouver, and we deny the application for rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's no questions, so awesome. We'll move on to Noel Heron, number 31. Oh, Mr. Heron.
Good evening, Your Honor and Council. Can you hear me adequately?
Yes, I can. Yeah, thank you.
The reason I'm here is I am a recent client, our family's a recent client of the Vancouver Hospice Society. I felt it was important that Council would hear from somebody who benefited greatly from the services of this organization. It's a truly remarkable organization. It was community initiated, community driven, and it has a history of 14 years. There are wider issues that emerge from this, and I hope Council will address them. The issue of long waiting lists, availability, the changing and emerging needs of this city, a city of 700,000 citizens, with increasing numbers of citizens like I am. I am a senior citizen, 84 years old, who spent 4 consecutive visits to emergencies, one to St. Paul's Hospital, the other 3 to VGH. We're increasing in number, and the numbers will have to be addressed by the city, by the Coastal Authority, Health Authority, and by the Ministry of Health, and also, by the way, by the recently appointed in the last year or two seniors advisory person, Isabel, I guess it's, I'm sorry of names, Mackenzie. Anyway, back to the issue of the Vancouver Hospice. This is no ordinary application. You have a market development project side by side with a non-profit organization, and it's obviously highly controversial. I'm not going to go over the issues raised by so eloquently by previous speakers. The care we received, the care that my late wife received, was incredible in this organization because it was done by a network basically of volunteers. And you can't replicate that kind of love. Really, that's what it was. It was compassionate care, but it was amazing. This application goes to the heart of what kind of city we live in. Core values and compassion and how we deal with them. We fully understand the emerging need for reasonable housing. I understand that, and the previous millennial speakers last evening underlined that. In fact, we have young families with children forced to leave the city. We have young people who can't find adequate accommodation. All this is the background to this particular issue. A number of these issues, have been covered adequately by previous speakers, but there are unaddressed issues that form the background to this, and wider issues as well. Wider, much wider than this application. I am totally opposed to this application. My family and I spent 5 weeks practically in residence in the Vancouver Hospice Society. It's a remarkable organization run by a network of, and this is important, of volunteers. You're looking at future community engagement. This is, again, obviously, no ordinary application for rezoning. Community engagement by these people across the province is a key to this. And its success has been remarkable. I think I'm going to stop there, and I just wonder, as a recent client of the organization, if council has any questions, because I think it was important for me to be here to tell you the value, the community value, the absolute, how wonderful this organization is. And I think the construction beside it, by the way, it's not just adjacent, it's cheek by jowl, and it will devastate the future of of the Vancouver Hospice Society. Make no mistake about it. And I would urge councillors individually, if you have not visited this specific location and seen the configuration of the exact building that's going to be erected or proposed to be erected beside it, you should do. The lane beside it is narrow, as somebody pointed out, and winding. The amount of construction proposed, you're going down for parking lots, you're going up 4 floors for housing, topped off by a patio garden. This, I'm sorry, is not a fit for this community. It's totally incompatible with the neighborhood.
Thank you very much. You do have a question from Councillor Boyle.
Thank you, Noel, Mr. Heron, for being here. This is not, I don't actually have a question. I just wanted to formally acknowledge your role as a school trustee and past role as a school trustee as you speak in this space, and thank you for that. And of course, condolences on the loss of Joan. But that's my brief break from not actually asking a question. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for your service. We also have a question from Councillor Hardwick.
Over here, can you see?
Sorry, Your Worship, I have one comment to make. There isn't a single person in this room that won't be confronted, either family or friends or neighbours or extended family, whatever, with the exigencies of end-of-life experiences we had as a family within the last few months. We're now emerging from the fog, I call it the fog of bereavement, but the expanded growth and the changes that senior citizens, because we're healthier, we're living longer because of astounding health care, That number is going to increase rapidly, and as one of your councillors has pointed out, we do not have adequate hospice facilities, as opposed to palliative care. As palliative care, they say adios to you after, a week or 2 or 3. It's very expensive. Our fees, by the way, at the hospice unit or hospice facility were something like $30 a day.
Thank you very much. You do have a question from Councillor Hardwick.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yes.
I do understand. I've gone through the loss of both my parents. We did in-home palliative care with my mom, and I feel it, and I know the fog of which you speak. We are here charged with looking at a development. There's nothing that prevents the neighbor next door to the hospice with developing this project, developing the land. It's their land, they can develop it. The question is really about scale and scope. So do you accept that the landowner has, first of all, the right to develop this land, and do you have any thoughts about how it might be developed in such a way to be more accommodating to the hospice?
I thought a lot about that, but I'm sorry, I don't think I can answer your question satisfactorily. I know there's a desperate need, and I understand the need for affordable housing. The city is going through a crisis in galloping rents. Just runaway rents really is the description for it. And as a former trustee in this city, I deplore the fact that we're sending young families and kids out to the suburbs, and we're going to have closure of neighborhood schools. This issue has a wider application as far as I'm concerned. I know that's not an answer to your question. I realize. I don't think I have a satisfactory answer. It's a highly controversial topic, but this is no ordinary rezoning. Make no mistake about it, because mark my words, the hospice societies, they're specialized health units address a very specialized health need post palliative care. Because the public hospital, rightly will say goodbye to you. They can't afford to keep patients for an extended period of time. So as a community, as a city, we're going to have to address an expanding need. As I said, I'm a good example of a senior citizen. I've been to emergency, not once, not twice, not 3 times, 4 times. That was 4 years ago. And the excellent medical care, and let's say it out loud and clear, that this province and this city provides is the reason I'm standing here. But that's going to increase the need for added hospice care down the line. And if today's announcement by the federal government is any indication about national pharmacare, we're going to live even longer. So, that's a good thing. But it's true. The fact is, my neighbor upstairs is 100 years old, 101. 3 years ago, she was swimming in English Bay, for God's sakes. So these are examples of we're living longer, healthier, and the city has to. Your problem is a tough one. It really is. I sympathize with you. I don't envy you, your decision. But the changing and emerging needs of your population in a vibrant, growing city, and how we handle them is right on your table. That's why we're on your doorstep, in a sense. And I appreciate what the developers have tried to do, but believe you me, what do I think about the project? I'm sorry to tell them, but their reorientation and adaptation is a bridge too far in terms of densification.
And we've got a question here from Councillor Swanson as well.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor Swanson.
Yeah, I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to also thank you for your work on the other end of the age spectrum for school lunches for kids. I don't know if everybody is as old as me. They probably don't know that you were one of the first ones to bring in the free school lunches for kids.
Frankly, it breaks my heart to see in the east side of the city the potential closure of 5 or 6 or 10 neighborhood schools. And what these, that we're sending young families to the suburbs. We're forcing them out.
Thank you very much for your time here this evening and for your
you.
service.
Thank you
very
very
much. Great. We have Douglas Knight, number 32, Sue Hurd, number 33, Jan Alexander, number 34. See somebody jogging in, Douglas Knight.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Up to 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. My name is Doug Knight, and I am a resident in this area. I am opposed to the proposal for the new development at 4575 Granville Street. I'm not active with Vancouver Hospice Society today, but I was. And I know you've had a lot of history about the organization and so forth, but it was started by two ladies at a kitchen table, I'm told, and the two Sues, we called them, and it's just growing from about 2000 to now. So here it is 19 years later, and we have a very successful, or I should say Vancouver Hospice is a very successful hospice, which is a real community asset in an area that there was no asset in 2000 when these two ladies conceived it. Now, in addition, they've gotten a lot of help, and they've been able to encourage and get others to volunteer and contribute, and it's their energy, their passion that's created this facility, almost despite government and other organizations that tried to say that it could never be done. And it was, I joined the board in 2008. I said I joined the board as long as I didn't have to raise any money for the organization. A month later, I was chair of the capital campaign. So these women are not to be trifled with. But we did raise the money. We raised enough money to be able to afford to buy a piece of property. It was a relatively good timing as well, so we're very fortunate. And we had people that had some expertise as well. But we looked specifically for a property, number one, that we could afford, which meant on Granville Street as opposed to 3 blocks in. Where do you find a half-acre piece of property in Shaughnessy without a beautiful house on it? This had a tear-down house, lived in, we're told, by students at UBC, not that they're bad people. But the care of the place wasn't very good, so we could knock that down and we could build a purpose-built facility, which is great. We bought it because it was zoned for a 6-bed health facility, so that we didn't have to get any zoning changes in order to build the building. And when we originally started to, we engaged Rossich Hempel to build the facility. And when they came back with the early designs, they wanted a 2-story structure. Of course, we couldn't build a 2-story structure that large in that area because we had to work within the zoning arrangements. We had to have setbacks, so that we didn't block the views of the neighbors on either side, and so forth. We had to have parking. We had to have all of these things, all of which we could comply with. But what we did is we had to sink the first story into the basement, essentially, which became meeting rooms and other things. But Rossich Hempel was very good. They designed a wonderful facility. And we complied with everything, even though, just so that we could get it done and have a facility there. If we knew that there could be other options, like having a facility like is going to be built next door, we would have built it. But we were limited at the time, by the rules that were in place at the time. So here we have a property that's going to destroy the sight line in one direction, totally different than the previous zoning. So there's virtually no setback from the sidewalk and so forth. And it's something that our facility can't benefit from because we've already built it. So here we have to suffer the design, et cetera, in an area where we had purposely built this building to take advantage of all the sort of amenities that we had under the old zoning.
Race down to 15 seconds.
Okay, so the reason it got built was, the invaluable volunteers, donors, supporters that have a heart for hospice. And I guess all I wanted to say is, do you have a heart for hospice? Because this construction, in that construction period, will be very damaging, I think, for the operation and particularly for the families.
Thank you very much for coming in today. And there's no questions. Okay, Sue Hurd, number 33, 34, Jan Alexander, 35, Patrick Gregg.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. My name is Sue Hurd. I'm actually one of the Sues, and I've been a volunteer with the Vancouver Hospice Society since its very beginning, watching it grow and become a strong community supporter as it is now. I am opposed to the development proposal. The hospice is supported by hundreds of people in our community who've raised millions because they believe this is a vital part of the city. It was created by the people of Vancouver for the people of Vancouver. And it's been embraced by the local population in Shaughnessy, who know that people from all walks of life come there to be supported. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I feel emotional when I say all this could come to an end if the development next door goes ahead. We could lose all of it. Our wonderful nurses, doctors, administrators, and even the thrift stores that exist in Kerrisdale and Kitts, they wouldn't have any reason to continue fundraising. I'm actually supportive of development and densification, even along the Granville corridor. But to threaten the existence of the hospice is wrong. There are some major human costs to this particular development. The hospice is an important part of our community and a vital service for an extremely vulnerable population. You've asked us how we might mitigate the effect of the construction of this townhouse. If the development goes ahead, I don't see how the hospice can continue to keep its doors open. And would you want a loved one to be exposed to the noise of jackhammers and chainsaws while they were in their last days? I certainly wouldn't. The townhouse proposes a huge undertaking with underground parking for 35 cars and way more impact than the building of the largest house or duplex would be. And we've all had to put up with construction in our neighborhoods, but we know that it will eventually end and peace will return. The dying don't have that option, and they deserve and need peace in their last days. And you've also been saying, well, something's going to be built next door, and it could be a 10 or 12,000 foot monster home. Well, I agree with the previous speaker, to Stephen Roberts, our chair, who suggests there is an alternative. The city and Vancouver Coastal Health recognize that we're desperate for more housing for the elderly. I think this could be the perfect opportunity for you as our councillors to approve a project that would be of benefit to so many more citizens of Vancouver. The Vancouver Hospice Society is capable of raising millions of dollars. If they could buy the property next door, they would start a capital campaign with the added support of you, the city. There are many possibilities. The hospice could be expanded to provide more than the mere 36 beds we have at present in the city. They could support a project to build a senior complex right next door to the hospice. And we are desperate for innovative housing for the elderly. In Vancouver at present, we have no specific facility, only supporting people with Alzheimer's. We have no plans that I'm aware of to build home-like villages specially designed for people with dementia, like single-floor cottage-like homes built like those that they're doing in the Netherlands. There is one being started in Langley, I just discovered, which is a great example of progressive thinking. This is the perfect opportunity for the City of Vancouver to use this piece of land in the right way, which will support the elderly and increasing numbers of vulnerable in the community. If the hospice was able to develop and design the building, it could be done with sensitivity to harmonize with the current specialized design of the hospice. It could be developed with the utmost care so as not to disturb the residents living in the hospice. The development would be closer to what has been built already next door, our hospice, and they wouldn't need to close their doors. So please do the right thing. Vote against this townhouse being built in this particular location. The townhouse designed by the architects could be developed in another location, even along Granville Street, but please not right next door to such an important part of our community. Please consider the dying and their families and use your integrity and make the right ethical decision by refusing this rezoning proposal. You have the power to stop this, and you have the chance to show compassion to change the direction that was taken by our previous city council. That's why we voted for you, to be innovative and change direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have Councillor DeGenova with a question.
Thank you very much. Perhaps you have information that I don't have. I will ask the applicant team and staff, but you had suggested that the city do something with the land. It's my understanding from our staff and being here even beyond this term that if it's not our land specifically, and we're talking about one lot of land, it's the applicants to be able to build what currently is zoned for. So do you have information that I suppose otherwise, that they are willing to sell this to Vancouver Hospice Society, or is there any other information I don't know about? Because I'm not sure how the facility could be expanded if there's another private landowner.
It's my understanding that this particular home was on the market to be sold. They tried to sell it many, many times. And then this opportunity came up with this interim rezoning policy that they have taken advantage of. But in fact, they were prepared to sell it for just a private sale. And I just feel like, yeah, we'd have to have agreement with the, if this doesn't go through, then we'd like the opportunity to say, would you sell it to us?
So what I heard before was that the only power council has is to look at this project. We can say yes or no. And if we say no, there could be an 11,000 square foot home built on this land, but we can't say you have to sell it to or put it back on the market to.
Of course not.
So although we're somewhat of a quasi-judicial system, that would be, I suppose that would involve expropriation, all sorts of things. And I'm not even sure that the site would qualify for that. I mean, I can ask staff, but I was just trying to clarify the comments that you had made. So that was a wish of yours. That wasn't
absolutely
any information that you had.
It seems to make so much sense, and I would just love to think that maybe the developer owner would consider doing that thing. What I really don't want to see is for the development to be right next door to us. We haven't even, I think somebody brought up earlier that the lane configuration, it's unbelievable that it's not, I mean, I'm amazed it's got this far when you see that lane. I bet you that it's just about anywhere else in Vancouver where the lanes run parallel with the main arteries of, like Granville Street. This lane ends up like a dog leg. It just heads off. You can't.
In the last council, I heard some councillors say that, but 105 Kiefer is still sitting as an empty piece of land. So I have to judge the project based on what's in front of us. I know this, but also understanding what could currently be built there if council chooses to refer it back, but those conditions couldn't be met. The project, as Councillor Hardwick noted in some of her questions before, would have to come back or not come back. It could be just built out in a home form and sold. I have to think about what legally the landowner currently is allowed to do. So I'm just asking those clarifying questions. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming out and staying again tonight.
Thanks very much. Councillor Fry has a question, at least.
Yeah, thank you for speaking to us. I want to just get a sense of, I mean, I've been kind of looking around on Google Street View and Google Earth and looking at the site and the neighbor locations, and it seems fairly predictable that the site that they're now looking to develop would have been developed. It's not an especially grand house, and it's the kind of location that, presumably would get developed. I'm sure you probably anticipated that when you purchased, and obviously you even anticipated the possibility of dreaming about seniors housing and that kind of thing. So I'm wondering if along the lines of that thinking you had anticipated how you might phase construction to keep the current operations still rolling along and keep the hospice operating while, in theory, constructing a seniors living facility. Had you considered it like a phased approach or how you might mitigate those impacts on your operations at the hospice?
Well, actually, the house immediately south to the hospice was a possibility. The problem is that we've got to this stage now where we're actually sort of liquid. We've got money. And, and originally, the whole vision was to create more than one hospice. We need more hospice beds than we have. And so I was kind of looking at that house next door, that because we knew they were an elderly couple, and they actually did kind of approach us, but at that point we weren't in any position financially to carry, build by that site. So this house to the north of us, I think it'd be great if we could have it.
Yeah, no, so and I appreciate that, and that it's just a dream, but also I'm just really wondering if you anticipated how you might phase and develop the construction so that it wasn't impacting the operations of the hospice while you were constructing, say...
Oh, you mean if we, sorry...
if you had that property...
Yes.
...and you were building a seniors facility...
Yes.
...how would the hospice continue to operate while you were constructing a seniors
Well, I think that we would have to be very, very sensitive to what's going on next door. Yes, it's construction's difficult. There's no doubt about it. But we would really, really be careful and make sure that we didn't disrupt the hospice as much as possible. It's a problem. If you're going to construct something, and the great thing about hospice that I've been to seeing hospices all over the world, and most of them exist. They are built after the existence of the surrounding areas, and so we're in this situation where we're right next door to, on both sides probably, of the possibility that eventually there will be changes. And so to mitigate that, I think that we'll be in a far better position if we're in charge and we can control the development next door.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question.
I appreciate that, and it's an important framework. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for questions. We have Jan Alexander, Patrick Gregg, and Marianne Cummings. Jan Alexander?
Yes.
Great. Thanks very much. Up to 5 minutes.
So, good evening, Your Worship and Council. My name is Jan Alexander, and I'm here as an individual. I'm not part of the Vancouver Hospice Society. I oppose this proposal. This place is a gem, and Granville Street is a gem. I've heard it referred that maybe we should be assuming that all the arterials are going to go, but Granville is a gem. I hosted an international conference of very highly skilled designers, 50 of them from all around North America, and they all kept exclaiming at the Metropolitan Hotel, "Oh my gosh, the drive-in from the airport, Granville Street," and I didn't know what they were talking about. They said, "Well, the hedges, and it's green. It's also busy," and they never mention the mountains. Let's rethink this thing about, seems to be an assumed idea about arterials. Yes, we need many varieties of housing for disabled people, seniors, anybody who wants to rent, anybody who wants to own. The units are getting smaller. Fantastic. I believe that this project is spot rezoning, and spot rezoning is very disruptive. It takes so much volunteer energy to deal with these proposals that seem to sometimes come from nowhere. So you've started on a citywide plan. I went to one of your workshops about it. It was really great. Everybody's talking about, what are we going to do? Well, one of the things is listening. We've got a group of volunteers who've been in the trenches since 2002. Let's listen to what they're saying. And I think what they're saying is this place is a gem. Let's go neighborhood by neighborhood and come up with a plan. We won't be faced with these kind of issues. RS5 zoning, who would have thought that it would be turned into this now? So let's remember the neighborhoods. Let's talk to the neighborhoods and listen. Let's really listen. And look at this. Isn't it interesting that one of the things everybody talks about when they talk about this place is that it's quiet. a group that could make a single-family home on Granville Street seem quiet. Let's be really talking with them and see how they did that. Now, there are options for the owner. They could, if the neighborhood were to want to do it, let's take this 100-foot lot, divide it under the existing rules. This thing we're trying up to 5% of properties. Let's try putting maybe 33-foot lots along there. Each lot could have, at least the way I understand the duplex zoning rules, could have strata units on there, up to 5 units for each lot. You could have 2 stratas, 2 rentals, and a lock-off suite. I think. It's been hard to really get the detail, but I think so. That would give us 15 units that would still have trees around it, wouldn't have a big parking lot, could merge with the neighborhood, and maybe be compatible with these guys, but let's talk to the neighborhood. The neighborhood want to do that. Subdivide into 3 lots instead of 2 large lots with a massive building on it. I think that does help us with these rental issues and downsizing for the neighborhood. I really believe that we should put a moratorium on these spot rezonings. They really cost us. I think the last thing I'd like to say is that these environments can be sort of daunting, and I sometimes feel the questioning can be a little pointed. And I know you all know that this group had a big celebration planned for tonight. I actually don't know much about it. As I said, I'm not part of the group, but when it was put over till tonight, one of the volunteers said to me, well, we're having a party that night. How can we be here? 120 people are going to be having their summer celebration. Somebody here could explain what it is. I honestly don't know. So they're here instead of there. They canceled that event. And I thought, oh my gosh, volunteers. So I packed up a bunch of tea and some China teacups and some cake from Bixby's Bakehouse, neighborhood bakery. And it's all outside there. And I'd really, really like to invite the staff, mayor, council, volunteers, after this is over, whatever the decision is, let's get started talking and listening as a group to each other. It's really, I mean it. Whatever you decide, let's talk, really, So that's how I'd like to leave it.
Thank you very much. You do have a question from Councillor Hardwick. Please go ahead, Councillor Hardwick.
Hi there. Out of interest, you introduced yourself as being here as an individual, as opposed to what?
Well, I'm very involved in my community, and I'm on a residency group.
Okay.
And so I'm not here representing any group. I'm here representing myself.
Thank you. I was just curious the way that you put it. Spoke that. And you indicated that you're recognizing that this is RS5 zoned currently, and so that there are other opportunities for increasing density on the property without what's presented here. So
if it were subdivided, right now, I guess you could build a duplex there and you'd end up with 5 units on there. It'd be pretty nice duplex. But I believe the duplex zoning applies to 33, maybe it's 30 or 50-foot lots, or 60. So that's how if we're looking for maximum, that's my thought.
Yeah, I think there's some variance on that, but anyhow.
Maybe there is, I'm sure there is.
Anyhow, that answers my questions, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have Patrick Gregg, 35, Marianne Cummings, 36, Adrian Crook, 37. Hello, you're Patrick?
Yes.
Great, okay, you have up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hello, Council. My name is Patrick Gregg. I am opposed to this. When I was 6, my grandmother died. It was hard for my dad and my aunt, my uncle, especially my grandfather, who had to live with her through that time. She had 24-hour care, and that helped, but she was too far along to be moved into a hospice. It was because of that nurse that my grandfather got through that. It wasn't easy for my aunt because a couple years earlier, her husband also passed away. He died of a heart attack. He He was supposed to go into a hospice, but they didn't have enough space for him. Losing this hospice to construction would be a disaster. It wouldn't allow families to have a peaceful place knowing that their loved ones are as happy as they could be in their final days. It's important that we keep these kinds of places around because we need to care for the people that gave us so much. And that's important. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in and sharing your story. I'm very sorry for your loss. Marianne Cummings, Adrian Cook, Carol Shaw. Marianne Cummings?
Marianne Cummings.
Great, thanks very much. Up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I represent the Shaughnessy Heights Property Owners Association. I am president of the Board of Directors. Our association is opposed to the rezoning of 4575 Granville Street. Our directors have spent a considerable amount of time reviewing the project, attending the open house, meeting with concerned residents of Shaughnessy, meeting with the architect and the project manager of the proposed townhouse development, and meeting with the directors, staff, and volunteers of the Hospice Society. Our conclusion is that the rezoning and proposed townhouse development will adversely affect the hospice, perhaps to the point that the hospice cannot maintain its operations and ultimately closes permanently. This would truly be a travesty. We know that technically this project may fall under the definition of affordable housing, but it is going to be far from affordable. When we went to the open house, rents of $3,800 a month were being discussed. This is going to require an income of $100,000 or more. When you balance the viability of the hospice, which serves all residents of Vancouver, against having more high-rent townhouses, we feel there is no contest. The work the hospice does is far more important for the public good. Individuals who are dying and in the final stages of life are some of the most vulnerable people in our society, and it seems heartless to disregard their needs. We understand that truly affordable housing is an important goal, and this means increased density, but this needs to be addressed in a citywide plan and a community plan, which means consultation with affected neighborhoods. I have been emailing the General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability, Mr. Gil Kelly, since February to try to set up a meeting with our neighborhood association to discuss the city's plans for Shaughnessy, but have received no response for him. Last of 4 emails was May 22nd. I thought perhaps it was because the city was not yet ready for these discussions. But these discussions should have occurred before this proposal for rezoning was brought forward by staff. It's not just a case of consultation with the developer. There should be consultation with the neighborhood. We are ready and willing to have that consultation, but I can't. All I can do is ask for it. I can't make it happen. But I do say, please do not approve this rezoning and project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And you do have a question. Councillor Boyle, please go ahead.
Thanks for your time. I'm curious if the Shaughnessy Heights property owners were in support of the hospice when it was first being proposed for the neighborhood.
You know, I don't know the answer to that question. I was not on the board of directors at that time.
Fair enough. I'm also curious, and I can look this up on Craigslist if you don't know, if you have a sense of what the average rent is in the neighborhood currently for a family who might be looking for a place to rent.
No, I don't have that information.
Okay. And I just had one other question. Let me just remind myself. Oh, I'm curious, and again, this isn't meant to be a skill testing question. If you have a sense, I grew up not too far from there, and I'm curious how many young people who grew up in the neighborhood still live, just anecdotally, still live nearby in the neighborhood are able to find homes for themselves.
Well, I do know people whose children do live in the neighborhood.
Okay.
And both of mine do. So,
Okay.
and I know others.
Yeah,
So
that's helpful. Thank you.
that's all I can say.
Thanks so much. Do you have another question from Councillor Hardwick?
Ms. Cummings, thank you. Does the Shaughnessy Heights Property Owners Association object to any multifamily development on this property, or is there something about this particular proposal that has, because as we've pointed out already, that the landowner has the right to develop the property. The zoning, of course, does contemplate more than just a single-family dwelling, which has been represented. Where do you guys sit on this?
Well, it's difficult for, I can't say where we sit on it. We look at this particular project, and it's sitting beside the hospice. And that is overwhelming for us, the hospice and the fact that it might close down, and that vulnerable people are going to lose this service. So we haven't got as far as what, if there's another proposal on the table, we will look at that. And again, as I have said, we have offered to meet with the city, with senior planners, and let's talk about what we would want. But I can't stand here without having a discussion and without involving the board and say what they would do about some theoretical development.
The reason I was asking that question is we normally get the perception of this labeling of NIMBYism. And I distinguish also neighborliness as being a set of values that we might want to be considering here. But it would be helpful, and I think maybe some of us will encourage Mr. Kelly to be in touch, because I take your point about the citywide plan and also the importance of being able to fit within the community. If the notion is, though, that we're categorically against any development adjacent to the hospice, we're not going to move forward. And so that's what I was really trying to get at.
I mean, I know that the property owners, and I'm a big proponent of property owners' rights, the property owner has the right to develop their property within the zoning. But this is a rezoning, a spot rezoning, and if we were completely against everything, we wouldn't be asking for meetings. We wouldn't be asking to talk to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much. Councillor Wiebe.
Yeah, quick follow-up on that. One of the previous speakers just talked about splitting this into 3 duplexes, 5 per lot, so 15 residents. Is that something that you would support instead of this project?
I'm here as the president of the board of directors. I would have to go back to the board of directors and talk about that. But I think the proper way to do it is for us to have a meeting with staff and to try encourage all of the directors to talk about it. I also, in some of these emails, I offered the opportunity to come and speak to our annual general meeting, which would have been far more people than the board of directors, about this, about the density. We are not blind to the fact that there needs to be some changes, but we need to talk about it. We need to consult.
It's just on the website of your association, it talks about single-family character and preserving it. So I was just...
Well, we would want to preserve, I think, the single-family streetscape in as much as we could. I mean, that is what it was. But I'm telling you, and as I've said in the 4 emails, we're willing to discuss it. I don't think I can go further than that tonight.
No, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate that we're having an open conversation. Let's get that dialogue happening. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And just before we move to the next speaker, just like to, there's been some notes going around from council in terms of extensions, but my calculations, we have about 5 hours left of speakers to go. And so even if there was, for example, a suggestion to extend to 11 o'clock, however, a number of councillors can't stay past 11 o'clock. And so I just wanted you to think it over. We got 45 minutes before we hit our deadline, but even if we extend by an hour, we'd still have 4 hours left to go. So just let you think about that as we Move on. Next speaker, I do see Councillor Dejanova on the list. Did you want a point of order or something?
Yeah, but I suppose point of order, point of information.
Sure.
Point of information to you, Mr. Mayor, is when would be the appropriate time to make those considerations.
Why don't we think about it a little bit and I'll come back and
I personally, I would like to voice that I think that going beyond 11 p.m. is problematic for the public. I've done this before. I've gone at park board until 3:30 in the morning. I just don't think it's fair to ask people to stay beyond that hour themselves. They might not have the opportunity to speak then. So
Sure.
that would be my preference, is that we go into 11.
Yes, and I've had, I think, 4 emails now from councillors saying they can't stay past 10 o'clock, so that's going to disrupt quorum, or getting close to it anyway. So anyway, let's just get through a couple more speakers, and then we can come back when people are thinking about it. Sure, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. A question is for you to staff, and that is, my understanding is that speakers were added to this list between the last time that we dealt with this issue and tonight. So I want to know if that would continue to happen. In other words, if more speakers could get added.
My understanding is, of course, at the end of every meeting, I have to call 3 times, so there would always be room for more speakers to come, but they can add themselves to the list, is my understanding, unless the clerk would like to add some clarification, or is that correct?
Okay.
Thank you.
That's clear.
Okay. Councillor Weeb, did you have
Yeah, I was just wondering if we do end at 10 o'clock, if Jan Alexander would still have that cake and tea ready for us, and so that we could celebrate the volunteers and the hard work that's been done by the organization.
We can. I can't answer that directly, but I can still see it out there, so I think you're probably okay. Thanks very much, then. So we don't need to call a motion right now, but we'll think about it. So we have Adrian Crook, 37, Carol Shaw, 38, Christina Parsons, 39. Mr. Crook, up to 5 minutes, please.
Right.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Is this thing on? All right, cool. Yeah, perfect. Thanks. Thank you, Your Worship and Council, for all your patience. I can't imagine being in your shoes and going through all this, so thank you for listening to all of us. I'm Adrian Crook. I'm a single father of 5 kids. I rent an apartment in downtown Vancouver. It's about 1,000 square foot apartment with 2 bedrooms and like a den, you'd call that, wouldn't you? Yeah. So for me, I make a decent sort of wage, so this would be an affordable development. So I do support this development. I should start off by saying that. So this would be affordable to me, and I think that's an important distinction when it comes to rental housing in the city, is it's often affordable to some and maybe not to others, but that doesn't make it not affordable at all. I, as a father of 5, have lots of exposure to the perspective of youth, whether I like it or not. They tell me. And one of the really interesting things about kids these days, as opposed to maybe when I was a kid or maybe when some of you were a kid, is the amount of focus in schools on issues like reconciliation, inequality in all its various forms, and on climate and climate change and the climate emergency that I think we know we're all in right now. And the other night when I was walking home from Guides in downtown Vancouver with Indiana, here my daughter, we had a conversation about this, and we actually wound up having a conversation about 4575 Granville specifically because it really sort of embodies the period of time we're in right now here in Vancouver. And what's really interesting is if you spend any time around anybody sort of millennial or younger, and there are plenty of people younger than millennials these days, that's an important thing to keep in mind, they have a really acute awareness of the climate issues that I referenced before, the systemic inequality sort of issues. And my daughter said that we have 12 years left to sort of fix this, and she seemed genuinely sort of moved by this and moved to action and sort of bewildered as to why we weren't moving faster. And, you know, one of the reasons I chose to live the way I live is to show kids that, you know, the way forward is to live smaller. 21 rental townhomes like this is a perfect example of that. These are family size units that are affordable to some. This would be an area that we would consider living in because it is on a transit corridor. We took transit here tonight, didn't we? So as you embark on this new city plan, which we can't wait for, so it's important that we have, as it's referred to, like spot rezoning such as this in the meantime. We've heard that what's important in that city plan is centering issues of climate change, spatial equity. I know the every neighborhood for everyone sort of mantra has been bandied about. And so the current model that we're in right now that leads to situations like this is like the exact opposite. It prioritizes the status quo, really. It prioritizes, you can build a 13,000 or 12,000 square foot mansion with impunity. You don't have to come up here and ask permission to do it. The climate externalities of that are really not your responsibility. It's not, you don't have to seek permission to do that. But if you want to do the responsible thing from a climate and spatial equity perspective, climate and spatial justice sort of perspective, then you do have to sort of perversely come here and beg for permission to do that. And that's a really odd, we seem to have gotten it completely backwards. And I think by the time Indiana here is, maybe sitting in one of your seats, hopefully we'll have figured it out. And maybe we'll have figured it out sooner so that this is not a situation where we have to beg for the right thing to be done here from a climate perspective, from a spatial justice or spatial equity perspective. Because as my daughter points out, we don't have much time. We've all heard the various quotes and they're, single-digit years or barely double-digit years that we have to figure this out. And 80% of our residential land is zoned in this really poor land use sort of inefficient way, and we've got to get around to changing that if we're going to have an effect on our future. And millennials, and I'm not even sure what we call your generation. I should have looked it up before I came here. Really, really young people. They need us to make the right decisions right now, not 3 or 4 years when we get a city plan, but right now in situations like this and in city plan, so that we can do them justice when they are sitting in your seats. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I do have a question. Councillor Dejanova, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thanks to both of you for coming. It's great to see participation in democracy and local government at such a young age. So thank you for both for spending your time here tonight. And if you were here the other evening as well. My question is about time. So you're talking about time from a climate perspective. We're hearing a lot about time from people who support and have very emotional connections with the hospice. Do you, in looking at this project, see a way that there could be some type of coexistence of that? And we've heard about density, we've heard about affordability. I have questions for the staff and the applicant team about that afterwards. But how do we consider not just this project, because I've looked back at public hearings that we've had during this council, and we've looked at projects like this, very similar to this, and we've approved them, or we've asked questions, or we've made considerations. But this is a very different consideration, considering some of the issues that have been raised by the neighbors. So I was hoping you might give your perspective on that, considering also the unique circumstance that you're also here with your daughter tonight.
Yeah, I think the proximity between the two, given that you're going to have families probably with young children, like myself, living close to what is something that we all grapple with at all ages, and that is like mortality. I think that's a real opportunity probably for both sides. I know there's some talk of like the idea that maybe playgrounds are sort of it could be good for some in a hospice scenario, but the other way around. I know when it comes to my parenting philosophy, I probably give my children sort of more learning opportunities than most, whether that's taking the bus alone, or being faced with some of the hard, like the more difficult realities of life. So if there was an opportunity to have these two developments work together, I don't know if that's a programming opportunity. I don't know if it's structural. It's probably more like a programming opportunity. There's probably like a mutual benefit there that could be arrived upon. My understanding from just what I've read about the application so far is that a lot of sort of mitigations have already been made on the part of the applicant. So I'm not sure, like, what, to hear what I'm looking at here referred to as towers, it's not, this is already a very low density sort of development. So I think it's, it's fitting in about as much as it can in that sort of neighborhood.
Thank you. Another question that I have is looking at the intergenerational connections. We see it a lot. We hear about it a lot, talking about some of the more positive pieces there. For instance, just visiting the Italian Center, they have their preschool next to their seniors facility. I'm not trying to say that that's the same as a hospice, but you had mentioned like opportunity to work together. I did send staff a question that they answered, and I'll ask the applicant later, but about the playground space, like maybe that could be an amenity for families that did visit the hospice, that if there were kids that wanted to play, or there was a way to kind of integrate that. I'm not sure that that's something they'd want, but is that something that you would see as something that should be on the table for council to consider if the applicant's willing?
I think I heard that earlier in the evening as well, and I don't see why. And I think I heard that the applicant was receptive to that sort of use of that facility. So to me, that makes perfect sense. And now to circle back a little bit, like, I think it's either your class or one of your siblings' classes. They've have an annual program where they go to like an elder care sort of facility as part of their school already. So there is this notion even embedded within the school system that this is a beneficial sort of relationship. So that would be an interesting programming point back to that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Both of you.
Council, just an update. I have had a number of emails back from councillors, and I would feel the majority is not for staying past 10 o'clock. That's what I've had so far. So just so you know. So my feeling is in the next half hour, we may get through 5 more. So I'll just read out the names of the next 5 people. Carol Shaw, Christina Parsons, Jane Dermer, Allison Cunningham, and Susanna Johnston. So I think if you're beyond that number, it might be tough to get on, but definitely if you're in the 50s, it'll be definitely, you won't be heard this evening, but I can come back the next time. So Carol Shaw will please come up, and up to 5 minutes, please.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can just lower the bench there. The clerks, can we just lower the bench a little bit? Clerks, can we just lower the bench? Yeah, thank you.
Technology,
There we go.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you for your patience, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. My name is Carol Shaw, and I've been a member of the Hospice Society from day one. I was a physiotherapist in my professional life. Today, my hope is to be the voice of those who can't be here, those receiving exceptional care at our hospice at this moment, and those who are going to need that care in the future. Obviously, I am not happy. I'm not a supporter of this proposal. But let me state, I absolutely applaud all opportunities and efforts to provide affordable, and I do stress affordable housing for the citizens of Vancouver. I'm not against townhouse developments per se, but I am against this particular townhouse development on this particular site. And I'm sure the developer can be easily find a more appropriate site along this corridor or close by. I'd ask you all to have an open mind. I think the other night there was some concern about precedent setting, but I would suggest this situation is very much a one-off, a very special situation where we were granted a permit to build a hospice, albeit with provisions regarding the height and size and so on, only later to be faced with this really relatively large 21 townhouse development next door because rules have changed. Rules, I might add, that were changed by a previous administration. I'm one of the many volunteers who tonight would have been at the celebration for volunteers who've worked tirelessly to fundraise, to get the money to buy the land, build the home, and now support the ongoing operation of our 8-bedded hospice. We're a community of volunteers working in our community for our community. As a volunteer at the hospice shop on 41st and Kerrisdale, I've met many people who glowingly speak of the care a family member or friend received at our hospice. An integral part of that care for them was this home-like situation. Now, this is no by accident. This was purposely built. From day one, the whole goal was to have a home-like atmosphere, an environment where we could provide as much a place as a home from home, along with exceptional care. So I'm a bit trying to think. Just for you, if you haven't been there, the rooms are spacious. Families can stay overnight. The French doors open out to a lovely patio where they can enjoy the garden and so on. Oh, thank you. Sitting a long time. And they can join and the goal again, an environment as close to a home as possible while providing exceptional care. Am I emotionally invested in this hospice? You bet I am. We have put our heart and soul into delivering what we feel is the best possible care in terms of hospice for the citizens of this city. And it distresses all of us greatly to think it could be compromised. The construction phase, we've heard a lot about, of course, and it's going to cause immeasurable distress to the patients, the family, and the staff. And I also fear if there is even a temporary closure of the hospice, that we're going to lose our remarkable staff, and they are truly remarkable. Their expertise, their compassion, and their commitment to us is unparalleled. Many of them have been with us from day one. But of course, it doesn't end there, right? The long-term implications of this development are of real concern. You know, what was once an oasis of calm and peace will forever be disturbed by the ongoing traffic to and from those 32 parking spots, the opening and closing of the underground parking gate, even though it has been positioned further away. Our privacy will be completely eroded. As we've heard, you've heard about the lane, you know about the entrances as from all the admissions to the hospice, and the departure of the deceased person is via this exit. I'd ask you all to put yourself in place of a family member or a friend accompanying your loved one on their admission to the hospice on what is to be their last journey. What was once a very private moment will no longer be so, and may be subjected to voyeurism from the overlooking from the balconies from the hospice, noise, constant traffic, and so on. Is this what you would want?
Just 10 seconds left.
I suspect not. Please help us protect this peaceful and valued hospice. I implore each and every one of you to please revisit this proposal and to reject it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. We have Christina Parsons next. Hello there. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Yes. Hello. Thank you for your patience. My name is Christina Parsons. The 8-bed Vancouver Hospice provides care to patients, their families, and friends during a time of significant transition. My concern with this application is focused on the proximity of the proposed development to the Vancouver Hospice, resulting in a disruption of the atmosphere that is integral to the facility. All of us have not had the opportunity to experience what the hospice has to offer. But, as we have all heard tonight and 2 nights ago, we have all lost someone we love, and we will again. We all know that the time around the loss of a loved one is often frantic. As families and friends, we are filled with many emotions, love and grief, just to mention a few. Having the space and psychological assistance to move through these individual experiences in a way that supports the dignity of the patient, the family, and the friends cannot be understated. A hospice that is embedded in a high-density environment is absolutely able to serve the needs of community members. However, it does not negate the benefit of the alternative, like the Vancouver Hospice, but rather highlights the value of maintaining the Vancouver Hospice, which is nested in a serene residential setting. Maintaining the diversities of hospices allows patients who choose not to pass away at their home or in a hospital bed distinct options from which they can select the location of their death. The Vancouver Hospice provides a unique place where your constituents, who are patients, families, and friends, can be removed from the distractions, noises, and stresses of our lives to focus on the active dying of the loved one. The current culture of the Vancouver Hospice ensures the ability of family, friends, and relatives to continue their invaluable connection with their loved ones until their death. In my opinion, it is paramount that the atmosphere in and around the hospice remain intact. The proposed application threatens this physical and emotional space that is currently available to our community. In my 30 years at the Vancouver Cancer Clinic, I have been privileged to walk alongside many patients on their cancer journey, journeys that are as varied as the colors of the rainbow. Part of each journey is the end. The Vancouver Hospice has, and I hope will continue, to provide a place of repose for patients on the penultimate part of their journey. We have and continue to be fortunate to have this caring and meditative place in our community. You now have the opportunity to allow this to continue. As mentioned by numerous speakers before me, is it not possible that together we can envision a community where the wishes of the living and the wishes of the dying are in sync? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time this evening. There's no questions, so we'll move on to the next speaker, Jane Dermer. Thank you very much for coming. Up to 5 minutes.
I will not be 5 minutes.
Okay.
My name is Jane Dermer, and I volunteer at the Vancouver Hospice, and I'm fiercely opposed to the 21 apartment building that's proposed for next door. The hospice operates as a quiet and peaceful final home for so many Vancouver residents in their last days. Friends and relatives come to spend time with their loved ones in a tranquil setting, and many others are served through the bereavement group that the hospice also supplies. Not many people know of the bereavement group, but this does mean that people are coming for counselling to the hospice, and again, this is a very quiet place for them to come, and they're usually in a very upset emotional state. If the proposal goes ahead, the noisy development stages, followed by the numerous comings and goings, will make the operation of the hospice almost impossible. Please consider how inappropriate the proximity of the project is to the hospice, which was supported and followed all the rules and regulations by the City Hall laid out 6 years ago. Also, the homes that are planned will be far too expensive to supply the affordable accommodation that Vancouver desperately needs. We know those accommodation is needed. I have 3 sons. I'm hoping they can afford to stay in Vancouver. But this building, you can all see it there in the middle. You can see how small the hospice is on one side and the other building on the north. It's so inappropriate for the actual position on Granville Street. As you're coming into Vancouver on Granville Street, tourists, everyone coming towards the city, comes over the brow of the hill, gradually coming towards the city. And at the moment, you have greenery each side of you. Our visitors love to tell us how green Vancouver is. Green was supposed to be the greenest, Vancouver was to be the greenest city in the world. But meanwhile, something like this doesn't really fit the image, does it? Thank you for your time.
Thanks for coming, and there's no questions for you. Let's see, Alison Cunningham. Thank you for coming. Up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mayor and councillors. My name is Alison Cunningham. I'm a Vancouver citizen. I'm not affiliated with the hospice or the developer. I am a person who became aware of the project within the last week and became gravely concerned about the suitability for this project in the space of a publicly funded healthcare, especially one where the resources are so scant and so few. It seems very obvious to me that the scale of this project is completely out of sync with the neighborhood, and given the fact that it's next to a single-story structure that isn't just a building, it's the last home that our neighbors, our friends, and our citizens, fellow citizens will ever know. It is, to me, so clearly not an appropriate use for that site that I don't know how the people associated with the hospice can be asked to think of ways to mitigate the impacts. To me, it is so fundamentally incompatible that it should not be a rezoning application that is approved. I think of not just the family members who go there to say goodbye to their loved ones, I think of the patient themselves. I've lived across from a 4-unit duplex that's being built for the last 8 months, and I've also lived across from a tower being built, one that had 11 stories. So I can tell you that if I had to choose when taking my last breath to listen to the noise of a duplex being built versus the drilling, hammering, excavation, the crew, the number of people involved, the installers for rebar, plumbing, for 2 towers, 21 units, the number of occupants that will be required on that site, and the narrowness of the lane. I looked it up on Google, and I'm just shocked that it isn't so completely clear that this is a great project for anywhere but beside a hospice when we only have 36 beds in all of Vancouver. It's very clear to me that this is a zoning application that should be rejected in order to fulfill our belief that we're creating a livable city. How can we say we believe in a livable city if we aren't creating an environment that's livable for the dying? You know, that's fundamentally inconsistent with the idea of a livable city. So I'm very nervous, I'm a little shaky, but I feel really strongly about this, and I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm like everyone on your side of the fence. I want what's best for the city. I want affordable housing, but not at the cost of palliative care. Not at that cost. That's not a price we should ask our neighbors to pay. There are so many other places this wonderful project could go. The price on this project is too high. It is simply too high. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in this evening.
Thank you.
There's no questions. Okay, Susanna Johnston.
Hello, my name's Susanna Johnston. I oppose the rezoning. First off, I'd just like to say that I'm in favor of developing and densifying our, most neighborhoods. I live in East Van, and it's happening around me, and I'm fully supportive of it. But I really appreciate the last speaker. I feel like everything she spoke of really resonated with me and how I feel about this rezoning. Anyways, I'm a physiotherapist. I work at St. Paul's Hospital. I work with the elderly. I work with 65 plus. I've worked in, throughout the hospital, I've worked in long-term care, I've worked in palliative care, and I now work exclusively with 65 plus in an outpatient setting. I'd just like to touch on something somebody said earlier. I think they were with the architect firm. They mentioned that, construction happens in hospitals, construction happens in long-term care facilities. And that didn't sit well with me. I've worked on the palliative care unit at St. Paul's. I've worked in every other single ward in that hospital. And there's construction currently in my unit. The palliative care unit, you walk onto that unit and it is peaceful, it is quiet, it is, you have to stop and slow down when you walk onto that unit. If there was construction on that unit, it wouldn't work. They would move the unit. So I just don't think that's an appropriate comparison to make. Sorry, I'm quite nervous. I also, I work with this growing population. I loved how the physician earlier said, we're all in the same boat. We're all headed there. And I guess, it's a very vulnerable population and they mean a lot to me. And I know how little resources there are in the community for them. This is going to be, if it's not already, an area of serious concern, like trying to support this population. We can't be taking away from them or, something as valuable as a hospice where they're going to have spend the end of their lives. I just feel really strongly that we need to support these communities. And I've really, growing old in this city and seeing my parents grow old in this city, I want to know that they're supported and that they have a place to go that is going to be protected. And, and I really want to live in a city where we choose to protect these places and choose something like this beautiful hospice with its beautiful, peaceful, serene environment over a development that could happen a block away or 2 blocks away. Like, I just don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for coming in this evening. We have next Lori Hurd and Alan Featherstone. Lori Hurd. Okay, thank you. Alan Featherstone. Absolutely. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. My name is Alan Featherstone, and I've been involved in civic issues for more than 40 years, more than as a hobby than anything else. And originally what I was going to say tonight, I've decided to change my comments because of some of the things that I've heard. I must say that I do admire and respect the work that the volunteers and the staff of the Vancouver Hospice does, and the dedicated people who have helped many families through their dedicated times. I do support the development for the simple reason we have to have new and innovative ways of dealing with our housing crisis. We can pretend it doesn't exist and say, well, the rents are going to be too high. Well, there's always somebody who will afford rents regardless of what they are. If it's $10,000 a month, there's going to be somebody who can afford it. The situation is that this is an area that will be high in demand. The cost of the land itself is incredibly expensive, I'm sure, and you're not going to have $600 a month units built anywhere in that area. The city is changing, whether we like it or not, and we can stand by, and over the years, I've heard so many times that the sky is falling and that the world's going to end if this development or that development or this bylaw or that other situation goes through. And frankly, I feel sorry for the people in the hospice, but they will survive. They will not close down. I mean, we can talk about the sky is falling, but simply can't imagine because hospitals, VGH, over the years, there's been incredible development there. There was development at St. Paul's. There's constant renovation at VGH and Lionsgate and other hospitals all over the place. They don't close down. The lack of thoughtful and innovative land use for housing will create a continued upward demand on prices and on availability. Where are we going to, house the service sector, the teachers, people who work in department stores, et cetera? They're being priced out of this city because of the fact that there is only so much land and so much housing. The only way we can change the situation is increase the supply. And we can put our heads in the sand and say, oh no, this particular project won't do anything. Well, yes, it will. It will help. It might only be a little bit, but it will help. The developer has also made a number of conditions to do with the construction of this project that a normal developer, if they were building the house, wouldn't have to do. And I think that's important. They do it for hospitals, so they can do it for this project as well. As to the argument that it doesn't fit into the surrounding neighborhood, I would ask, with the increase in density that's on Oak, Granville, and Canby Streets, would it have proceeded if all of the neighbors had said, no, 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 no? We have increased density along there. It fits into the neighborhood. It's only on the edge of the neighborhood, as this project will be as well. There's a certain amount of NIMBYism in many, many neighborhoods about, oh no, we can't have, well, on the periphery, we have to use imaginative ways to increase the density and slowly get into the neighborhoods in an easier, an easy way of having lower density as it moves into the neighborhood. As for the noise of construction, for God's sakes, this is on Granville Street. There's motorcycles, trucks, buses, everything you can possibly imagine are going up and down that street and just making a hell of a noise. So, surely to goodness, the hospice has double glazed windows or triple glazed windows to remediate the cost. If there's a problem with the noise, does that mean that when the projects are going to be done on Thurlow Street in downtown Vancouver, between Thurlow and Burrard, right next to St. Paul's and close to St. Paul's, that they won't proceed because they're so close? Oh, no, we can't have any noise? Well, I think those projects will proceed. And, many complaints about the construction noise. If we have that, well, then someday when I'm sick and can't go to work, I can say, oh, no construction in my neighborhood because I can't go to work today because I'm sick. Well, we live in a city. There's noise, there's lots of activities, there's airplanes, there's helicopters, jet planes, and everything else creating noise in this city. And so therefore, as I say, I've sort of thrown out my notes and made a few observations that I don't think have been made so far. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for your time. There's no questions, but appreciate you coming in tonight. Thanks. Okay, so we are at 5 to 10, Council. Again, we've polled around, and we won't be, unless somebody wants to put a motion forward, there doesn't seem to be, through the emails that sent to me, any will to come to move to 11 o'clock. We have Councillor Dominato.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I would be willing to propose to move a motion to extend past 10 to 11. Obviously, I get that it's been polled and willing to put that out to council and see where that vote lands.
Sure. We have a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Fry. I had a point of information here from Councillor Dejanova first, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, Councillor Dejanova.
I can stay till 11 tonight. I think that I understand. My point of information is are we looking at sort of our best practices moving forward? I understand, but we have a pilot process for everything else. I know it's public hearing process, but we did signal to some people that we weren't going until 11. What's the question? So my question is if speakers had already left because they thought we were only going until 10 p.m., and we finish ahead of time, sorry, I was trying to preempt my question to explain why I was asking it. Okay. There were a number of council members that said that they couldn't stay beyond 11 or stay beyond 10. I know that we did a polling and we went around. It's great that some can, some can't. We could continue if we had quorum. The question is are they going to have an opportunity to speak? I suppose it all depends if we finish, when we finish.
So the question is,
will they have any special opportunity to speak, or would they expect to come back at the reserve date that will be held for this?
I'm not sure what they're thinking, but I did say that we were only going to 10, and we only had enough time for 5.
I thought we had said that before. So,
but that's what I said. So sorry, and Council.
So I won't be voting in favor of this because I don't think it was fair to let people know that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor
Otherwise, I would have.
Boyle. There we go.
I was just going to ask, I know a number of us are committed to watching the hearing, even though we can't stay, so I just thought maybe a straw poll on if we'd have quorum to stay until 11 might be helpful.
I don't think so, actually, because that's been going on a couple of meetings. I think we have to decide as a group of whether we're going to stay, and because...
Yeah, I just wonder, because the vote to extend has to be unanimous, I'm happy to vote to support that, but want to know if we'd have quorum.
So it's on the floor. Councillor Dominato?
I was just going to add, is because certainly, and we've done this in the past, kind of gotten a sense of how many people here are still remaining to speak, and we could also, if there was someone on the list that was missed, I'm sure we could notify them, because we did say we'd end at 10, so if we went to 11, hypothetically, those people who were...
There's that, the motion's on the floor.
Yeah.
We had done a straw
Speaking to the
poll
motion.
through email. We don't really speak to this motion. I don't believe so. So it's just a motion to extend. Councillor Boyle, do you have anything else to add?
Nope.
Okay. So I will call a question then. So we have a second on the floor. Who can extend to 11 p.m.? 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and who cannot? All right, I'm gonna have to call a vote then. If we're not, just gonna call the vote then. A recorded vote. Okay, so yeah, we're voting. Yeah, Councillor Swanson, Councillor Dejanova, Councillor Carr. Okay, so we have, that's passed. We're staying until 11. No, right? I'm sorry. Has to be unanimous. I'm wrong. It is not. It's failed, so we won't be staying till 11. Sorry about that. So that's it. We're done for the night, and we are coming back at Thursday, June 20th at 6 p.m. It's just 10 questions to staff. Deputy Planner. I probably shouldn't have recorded that one. Sorry. Oh, yeah.